Trigger warning. Ghosts, ghouls, and gruesome stuff ahead. It's weird. It's dark. It's your kind of vibe. Welcome to Haunted and Homicidal, the podcast where true crime meets the paranormal. I'm Lauren.
And I'm Courtney. Every week we uncover the terrifying, the twisted, and the totally unexplainable. Lock your doors and grab your sage.
Because things are about to get haunted and homicidal. Hey guys.
What's up?
Today's going to be a very depressing day, and I'm going to apologize well in advance.
It's also very, very long.
And give you a very, very, very upfront second trigger warning outside of the intro. Because this one is rough. And I think a lot of people probably know about it, or at least heard something about it.
Rough?
It's very bad.
God.
This is like David Parker Ray rough, but more.
Mother.
If possible. It is bad.
Bruh.
It's bad. And initially this was an accident, because it was supposed to be something else, but I had already covered it, so I had to like quickly choose something. And this really should have been one of my bigger stories, a two-parter, because it's very long. But after the 3 days it took me to do the research and not wanting to stop doing it, and then not wanting to find something else to do, it's just going to be a long one, and I apologize. So we're going to have to just jump right into it. Skipping all the formalities, except
Word from our
sponsor. Hey guys.
What's up?
We are going to talk to you about something called HauntFest. Super excited. We are partnering with them
Woot.
for all of their little events. So HauntFest is crawling back from the darkness, bringing more mayhem, monsters, and madness each year.
Step through the gates and into a fully immersive world of horror art, live music, spooky vendors, themed entertainment, and eerie activities lurking around every corner. Depending on the event, you may find axe throwing, trivia, animal encounters, rage rooms.
Ooh.
I need to do a rage room. Photo ops, food and drink, ghost stories, freak shows, hay rides, haunted attractions, and more. Some locations even feature camping, after-hour parties, and other exclusive surprises.
Our characters, awesome name by the way, that is so cute.
I know, right?
Roam the grounds hunting for fresh screams. If you're easily spooked, grab a Ghoul Gone Glow bracelet at the gate to help keep the beasts at bay. Which is cute. You know, people have like autism and stuff, and their little or kids are scared. I love that they do stuff like that.
My old roommate wanted one for when we went to Terror on the Coast.
Nice. So yeah, HauntFest, they're taking everybody into consideration. Pre-sale tickets start at a killer price. For the full nightmare experience, upgrade to the RIP Pass for exclusive perks. Season passes are now also available, granting access to any HauntFest event throughout the whole entire year.
Whether you're a thrill seeker, a horror fanatic, an Addams Family, or simply dead inside,
That's me.
like Lauren, HauntFest is where Halloween never dies.
This is my jam.
Slip on your monster skins and join us for a weekend of scares, screams, and unforgettable memories.
Join HauntFest at the 2026 premiere of Death March at Trim Tab Brewing Company in Birmingham, Alabama. The thrills begin at 2 p.m. on March 7th and 8th, with the event ending at midnight on Saturday and 8 p.m. on Sunday.
And then HauntFest is back for its 4th annual Athens, Georgia event, April Ghouls, at Terrapin Beer Company on April 11th and 12th, 2026 at 2 p.m. Throw on a costume and boogie at our new Dead Man's Party from 10 p.m. to midnight on Saturday.
I'm loving all these names.
I know, right?
HauntFest returns to historic Hopkins Farm in Simpsonville, South Carolina for a September to Dismember on September 25th and 26th from 5 p.m. to midnight on Friday and 2 p.m. to midnight on Saturday. Hopkins Haunted Attraction will feature a sneak peek walkthrough haunt for the event, which will open at 7:30 p.m. each night and is included in your festival entry ticket. A September to Dismember will be a full-fledged weekend festival with vendors, live music, themed entertainment, and much more. prepare for a dead man's party.
This November, join us for some post-Halloween thrills at the premiere of HauntFest Harvest of Horrors at Bobby Brown Park in Elberton, Georgia. The magic begins at 5 p.m. on the 6th and 2 p.m. on the 7th, continuing until the clock strikes midnight. Camping, yurts, movie screenings, bouncy houses, and more are offered at this venue. If you're a raging psychopath,
I am.
sign up to sleep in our Night Terrors camping area where our ghouls can creep around your tent after hours until 2 a.m. on Sunday morning.
That sounds so fun, guys.
To take a first look at the venue, come to our free On the Water Sink or Swim horror movie promo event on July 25th. For more information, to get involved, or to buy tickets, visit hauntfest.net.
Guys, do it. Okay, love you. Bye.
Do it.
So now that there's that, you had a little good 5-minute break. We're going to go ahead and get into it today. Again, this is very long, so grab your snacks, grab a drink, go potty, do what you got to do. And again, sorry.
No, she's not.
No, I really am. This one's bad. So, today I am going to talk about the Moores murders. Ian Brady is one of the suspects. He was born January 2nd of 1938.
What you mean one?
He was born January 2nd of 1938.
Bitch, what you mean one?
I mean one of. He was born in the Gorbals area of Glasgow, so England, UK area.
Oh.
This is not a stateside story. This is over in the UK.
Okay.
His parents were Margaret Peggy Stewart. The father was never reliably identified, although Peggy states that he was a journalist working for a Glasgow newspaper who died 3 months before Ian's birth. Glasgow. Peggy was an unmarried tea room waitress, raising Ian alone with very little support. And, after a few months of doing this by herself, she was forced to give her son into the care of Mary and John Sloan, a local couple with 4 children already of their own, but they were more capable of taking care of a child than she was. Ian's last name changed to Sloan, and his mother continued to visit him throughout his childhood, so it wasn't like they didn't have a relationship.
Yeah.
It was just kind of sporadic. And she knew, being young, unmarried, alone, it was difficult to raise a child.
Yeah.
At the age of 9, Ian visited Loch Lomond with his family, where he reportedly discovered an affinity for the outdoors. So when he was 9, he was like, this shit's fucking great.
Okay.
I love trees, right?
I love trees.
This kind of, this plays into the story later on, okay? So just keep in mind, he loves the outdoors.
Maybe not want to go outside anymore. Just go live in my house.
As long as you don't go into like bogs, swamps, or moors, I think you'll be okay.
I'm just going to stay in my house.
A few months later, the family moved to a new council house, which is like an apartment complex, on an overspill estate at Pollock. Various authors have stated that Ian began torturing animals during this time.
No.
It was reported that he boasted of killing his first cat when he was only 10 years old.
No.
And then went on to burn another cat, stone dogs, and cut off rabbits' heads.
No. Fuck that.
Although he later denied that he abused any animals at any point in his life. So, like, neighbors and stuff reported this, but he was like...
I'm sorry, Beach.
Yeah. Ian was like, I never did that. So, we really don't know. I would lean more towards yes, especially later on when we kind of know what happens. So, Ian's behavior worsened when he attended Shawlands Academy, which was a school for above-average pupils, so he was very intelligent. As a teenager, he twice appeared before a juvenile court for housebreaking, which in the UK, that's just breaking and entering, right?
Yeah.
Ian left the academy when he was 15 and took a job as a tea boy at a Harlan and Wolff shipyard in Govan. 9 months later, he began working as a butcher's messenger boy. Ian had a girlfriend at the time named Evelyn Grant, but their relationship ended when he threatened her with a flick knife after she went to a dance with somebody else. He again appeared before the court, this time with 9 charges against him, and shortly before his 17th birthday, he was placed on probation on the condition that he live with his mother, his biological mother. By then, Ian's mother had moved to Manchester and married an Irish fruit merchant named Patrick Brady. Brady adopted him. Ian took on the last name. Patrick got Ian a job as a fruit porter at Smithfield Market. Within a year moving to Manchester, Ian was caught with a sack full of lead seals he had stolen and was trying to smuggle out of the market.
What the fuck?
He was sent to Strangeways Prison for 3 months. As he was still under the age of 18, Ian was sentenced to 2 years in a Borstal for training. And a Borstal is like a youth detention center, kind of. He was sent to Latchmere House in London and then to Hatfield Borstal in the West Riding of Yorkshire. After being discovered drunk on alcohol, what else could he be drunk on?
I know.
That he had brewed on his own.
Okay.
So it's probably really fucking strong. Ian was moved to the much tougher unit in Hull, which was like, like in prison they have like cell block this is like amateur offenders, cell block this is like fucking murderers and pedophiles. So he was like moved to a unit that had like more violent offenders, more unruly, not behaving offenders. I mean, because being drunk on alcohol is not the same as like fucking violent offense or murder. Yeah. It was just, he couldn't be trusted. He needed more supervision, so they put him in like a more supervised, stronger unit. He was released on November 14th of 1957, and he returned to Manchester where he took a laboring job that he fucking hated.
Of course.
And was dismissed from another job in a brewery. It doesn't say why, probably because he was drinking all the product.
Probably.
Deciding to quote-unquote better himself.
Sure, dude. Sure.
He obtained a set of instruction manuals on bookkeeping from a local public library with which he quote-unquote astonished his parents by studying alone in his room for hours. In January of 1959, Ian applied for and was offered a clerical job at Millward's Merchandising, a wholesale chemical distribution company based in Gorton. He was regarded by his colleagues as quiet, punctual, but a short-tempered young man. Ian read books including Teach Yourself German, Mein Kampf, which was written by Hitler, and a book about Nazi atrocities. And not for the sense of he wanted just to learn about it. He wanted to emulate, and he was fascinated by it. He was reading them for pleasure, not for knowledge. Okay, so keep that in mind also.
Alrighty.
He was partially inspired by the life and works of French author Marquis de Sade, whose name was the etymological inspiration for the term sadism.
Yeah.
You see where we're going? Do you see what path he's heading down?
Oh, Lord.
Okay. Suspect number 2, Myra Henley. She was born July 23rd of 1942. She was born in Crumpsall and raised in Gorton, which was a working class area of Manchester dominated by Victorian slum housing. She was born to Bob and Nellie Henley. Unfortunately, Bob, her dad, was an alcoholic who was frequently violent toward his wife and children. During the Second World War, Bob had served with the Parachute Regiment and was stationed in North Africa, Cyprus, and Italy. He had been known as a hard man while in the army, and he expected his daughter to be equally tough. He taught her to fight and insisted that she stick up for herself, which isn't a bad thing to a point. The family home was in poor condition, and Myra was forced to sleep in a single bed next to her parents' double bed. Their living situation deteriorated further when Maureen, Myra's younger sister, was born in August of 1946. The following year, Myra was sent to live nearby with her grandmother. When Myra was about 8 years old, a local boy scratched her cheek, drawing blood. She burst into tears and ran to her father, who threatened to leather her, which means beat her with a belt, if she did not retaliate. So, Myra went back out. She found the boy and knocked him down with a series of punches. So, she beat his ass.
What the fuck?
Because her dad told her to, or she was going to get beat. She later wrote, quote, "At 8 years old, I'd scored my first victory." Malcolm McCullough, professor of forensic psychiatry at Cardiff University, has written that Myra's, quote, "relationship with her father brutalized her. She was not only used to violence in the home, but rewarded for it outside of the home. When this happens at a young age, it can distort a person's reaction to such situations for the rest of their life." So, in June of 1957, one of Myra's closest friends, 13-year-old Michael Higgins, invited Myra to go swimming with friends at a local disused reservoir, so people weren't typically using it for anything. It
Yeah.
was no longer really a reservoir. It was just like a swimming hole for kids now. A dangerous one. They shouldn't have been there. But she instead went out elsewhere with a different friend. Unfortunately, Higgins drowned in the reservoir, and Myra, who was a very good swimmer, was deeply upset and, blamed herself. Like, if only I had been there. She took up a collection for a wreath for his funeral that was held at St. Francis Monastery. So in the beginning, she sounds like a good kid, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're all on the same page. The monastery where Myra had been baptized as Catholic as an infant in 1942 had a lasting effect on her. Myra's father had insisted she have a Catholic baptism. Her mother agreed on the condition that she not be sent to Catholic school, believing, quote, all the monks taught was catechism. So she was like, we'll baptize her, but I don't want her to go to Catholic school because that's all they teach. They don't teach real world things. All they teach about is Catholicism and catechism. That's all they teach about. I don't want that. So Myra was increasingly drawn to the Roman Catholic Church after she started at Ryder Browse Secondary Modern, the school, like middle school, I guess.
Okay.
And began taking instruction for formal reception into the church soon after Higgins' funeral. She took the confirmation name of Veronica and received her first communion in November of 1958 at the age of 16. Myra's first job was a junior clerk at a local electrical engineering firm, where she ran errands, typed, made tea, and was well liked enough that when she lost her first week's wage packet, someone stole it, she misplaced it. The other woman in the office took up a collection of their own money to replace it.
Oh, that's so nice.
They made sure she was paid. So she was that well liked. At age 17, Myra became engaged after a short courtship, but called it off several months later after deciding the young man was immature and unable to provide her with the life she wanted. Slay. Yas queen.
Okay.
Yas queen. So again, up until she was like 17, things seemed to be going pretty good for Myra. She seemed to be a good person. She did good things. People liked her. She also took weekly judo lessons at a local school, but found partners reluctant to train with her because she was slow to release her grip. So once she had them, she didn't want to let go. And people were like, no, not this one. She can train by herself. So that was like the only thing like that was like negatively said about her really in her teenage years.
Yeah.
So Myra took a job at Bradby and Hinchliffe, an engineering company in Gorton, but was dismissed after 6 months for absenteeism. So they were like, you're not showing up. You no longer have a job. Which, like, duh.
Yeah.
So in January of 1961, the 18-year-old Myra, 18,
how old was he at this point?
In 61, he would have been, I don't know. Nope, not clock. That's not going to tell me anything. 23.
Okay.
He was like 5 years older.
Okay.
So, I mean, not too bad of a jump.
Yeah.
So, in January of 1961, the then 18-year-old Myra joined Millwards, which is where Ian works.
Yeah.
As a typist, she soon became infatuated with Ian.
Of course.
Myra began a diary.
Oh, no.
And although she had dates with other men, some of the entries detailed her fascination with Ian, to whom she eventually spoke to for the first time on July 27th.
It took her
5 months.
6 months. 6 months to talk to this. Wow.
He paid her no attention. She was just obsessed with him for 6 straight months. So keep that in mind moving forward. That dynamic. Keep that in mind. Over the next few months, she continued to make entries, but grew increasingly disillusioned with Ian. And that was until December 22nd when he asked her on a date to the cinema. So almost a year after she was employed. 11 months later. Ian and Myra's dates followed a regular pattern. A trip to the cinema, usually to watch an X-rated film. And I didn't know they did that. Like, I know they have, like, dirty movie theaters, but this just seemed like a regular theater that played dirty movies. I mean, and again, this was in the 60s.
But I feel like with that, you have to be, like, a certain age or something.
She was 18.
Yeah, well, yeah, but I think you still had to be, like, 18 and shit. They still checked that.
To be able to go into that one movie. I just didn't realize, like, they had it like that. Like, they have titty theaters here, you know? I don't know what to call them. Dirty movie theaters. But this sounds like, you know, they went to Cinemark and, you know, Room 12 was the X-rated movie film. I don't know. But this is also the UK, so things might be different there.
Everything's different than America.
Yeah. But then they went back to Myra's house, not Ian's house, to drink German wine. Ian gave Myra reading material. Guess what kind of reading material? And the pair spent their lunch breaks reading aloud to one another from accounts of Nazi atrocities.
Okay.
Myra began to emulate the ideal of Aryan perfection, bleaching her hair blonde and applying thick crimson lipstick. She occasionally expressed concern at some aspects of Ian's character. In a letter to a childhood friend, she mentioned an incident where she had been drugged by Ian, but also wrote of her obsession with him.
What the fuck?
A few months later, she asked her friend to destroy the letter, I guess because she thought it was evidence of... Anyway. Myra began to change her appearance further, wearing high boots, short skirts, and leather jackets, which was considered risque for the time period. Remember, it's the 60s or the 50s, like late 50s, early 60s. Both she and Ian became sociable with their colleagues. The couple were regulars at the library, borrowing books on philosophy as well as crime and torture. They also read works by Sade, Friedrich Nietzsche, and Fyodor Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. Although Myra was not a qualified driver at the time, she finally passed her test in November of 1963 after failing it 3 times. She often hired a van in which the couple planned bank robberies.
How do you hire a van?
You rent it. Okay. You're renting a van. Again, this is British stuff. They speak differently over there. So I was like having to try to put things into American terms because I'm like, no one's going to fucking understand this.
Okay.
Myra befriended George Clitero. The president...
That's not how you say that.
Clitero.
No.
Clitero.
No.
Clitero.
No.
Clitero. The president of Cheadle Rifle Club, and on several occasions visited 2 local shooting ranges. Clitero.
Just say George, damn it.
Clitero. Although puzzled by her interest, arranged for her to buy a .22 caliber rifle from the gun merchant in Manchester. She also asked to join a pistol club, but she was a poor shot and allegedly bad-tempered, so Clitero told her she was unsuitable. He was like, you can't shoot and you have a bad attitude and a bad temper. Access denied. She did, however, manage to purchase a Webley .45 caliber and a Smith & Wesson .38 caliber from other members of that club.
Did she do all the fucking work? Ian not buying guns and shit?
Ian and Myra's plans for robbery came to nothing. However, they did become...
Like they didn't do anything with that? Okay.
No, they just planned it. They talked about it. However, they became interested in photography. Ian already owned a box brownie, which I didn't know what that was. I know there's like a website called Box Brownie where they like edit your photos for you. But it's basically a type of camera that looks like a cube. It's a cube camera. Yeah, it's cute. I had to look it up because I had no idea what that was. Which he used to take photographs of Myra and her dog Puppet. But he upgraded to a more sophisticated model and also purchased light and darkroom equipment. The pair took photographs of each other that at the time would have been considered explicit. Now it's probably like sexting and normal.
Nudes.
For Myra, this demonstrated a marked change from her earlier more shy and prudish nature.
Oh, yes.
So Myra claimed that Ian began to talk about, quote, committing the perfect murder around the beginning of July 1963 and often spoke to her about Meyer Levin's Compulsion, which was a published novel in 1956 and then adapted for film in 1959. The story tells The stories tell a fictionalized account of the Leopold and Loeb case, 2 young men from wealthy families who attempt to commit the perfect murder of a 12-year-old boy and who escape the death penalty because of their age.
So they were trying to recreate that?
Sort of.
Okay.
Like the same principle. So they were trying to plan the perfect murder, and they were using this story to kind of build that. I don't know how old Leopold and Loeb were in the stories. I've never read it. But again, at this time, they were in their 20s, so like age would not have mattered. Yeah. And at that time, for them to quote unquote get away with it, right? It wouldn't have mattered because they were old or older.
They're old.
By this stage, Ian had moved in with Myra at her grandmother's house in Bannock Street, Gorton, and on July 12th, the two murdered their first victim, 16-year-old Pauline Reed.
The fuck?
So, at this point, we're going to kind of briefly touch on the victims, and then later on, we're going to get kind of more into detail of, like, what happened to them, why, things like that. So, because like this particular part doesn't mention all their victims. It just mentions like really the ones that they were absolutely connected to, that they had the evidence of. So Pauline Reed had attended school with Myra's younger sister Maureen, so they knew each other, and had also been in a short relationship with David Smith. We'll talk about him later. A local teenager with 3 criminal convictions for minor crimes.
Oh, so she like the bad boys.
Police found nobody who had seen Reed immediately before her disappearance, and although the 15-year-old David Smith was among the people questioned by police, he was cleared of any involvement in her death. So again, remember the 2 people connected to Pauline Reed. Maureen Henley, which is Myra's sister, and David Smith, who will resurface as a very important character later. Okay, those 2 names. Okay. But he was cleared of any involvement in her death. I don't know if I said that or not, but there you go. Ian and Myra were not among the people questioned because at that time they had no reason to question them. The couple's next victim was 12-year-old John Kilbride.
The fuck you? Okay.
He was lured away from a market in the town of Ashton-under-Lyne on November 23rd and murdered on Saddleworth Moor, where his body was buried. This is why it's called the Moor Murders. All the bodies were buried there. A huge search was undertaken with over 700 statements taken and 500 missing posters printed. 8 days after he failed to return home, 2,000 volunteers scoured waste grounds and derelict buildings just in case he had like wandered into one, got lost. Myra had hired a vehicle the week after Kilbride went missing and again on December 21st, apparently to make sure the burial sites at Saddleworth Moor had not been disturbed.
The fuck?
In February of 1964, she bought a secondhand Austin Traveler, but soon after traded it in for a mini pickup. So like an Austin Traveler is like a minivan.
Oh, okay. And
then traded it in for like a smaller truck. Keith Bennett, also aged 12, disappeared in the Longsight district of Manchester on June 16th of 1964. His stepfather, Jimmy Johnson, became a suspect. Since they usually do, the parents first, like parent, spouse, people the closest. In the 2 years following Bennett's disappearance, Johnson was taken for questioning on 4 separate occasions. Detectives searched under the floorboards of the family home, and on discovering the houses in the rows were connected, extended the search to the entire street. They found nothing in the home. Nothing, because there wasn't anything to find. Maureen Henley married David Smith on August 15th of 1964.
Her sister married him?
I told you he would resurface.
Okay. What the fuck?
But he also plays a huge role. The marriage was hastily arranged and performed at a registrar's office. None of Maureen's family attended. Myra did not approve of the marriage, and her mother was embarrassed because 18-year-old Maureen was then 7 months pregnant and was marrying the 16-year-old David Smith.
What?
The couple then moved into Smith's father's house in the Ancoats district, although they were soon rehoused in a tower block flat on the new Hattersley Overspill housing estate. So, like, what I looked up, because I was like, what does all this stuff mean? These were basically like Section 8 houses. Like, this was like a bad bad neighborhood, low income, like Section 8 public housing. These what these houses are, because you'll hear throughout the story that the government moved them to this location. They moved them to this location.
16-year-old knocked up an 18-year-old.
Look, like I said, it's a wild story.
What the fuck?
Yeah. So the day after the wedding, Ian suggested that the four, he, Myra, Maureen, David, take a day trip to Windermere. This was the first time Ian and David had met properly, and Ian was apparently impressed by David's demeanor.
Oh, no.
The two talked about society, the distribution of wealth, and the possibility of robbing a bank.
Oh, Lord.
The young 16,
Lord.
Ian's in his 20s. The young David Smith was similarly impressed by Ian, who throughout the day had paid for his food and wine. So the 16-year-old's like, fuck yeah, free food, free alcohol. Hell yeah, I like this guy. It's like any fucking 16-year-old would be, right?
Oh, fuck.
So the trip to the Lake District was the first of many outings. Myra was apparently jealous of their friendship between Ian and David. But during this time, because Ian and David were like attached at the hip, she and her sister like became closer, which is like a good thing. Meanwhile, in 1964, Myra and her grandmother were rehoused as part of the post-war slum clearances in Manchester. So again, like public housing, they're moving them around to better buildings. Put that in like really big quotes.
Yeah.
Moving to 16 Whortlebrook Avenue, a newly built council house on the Hattersley-Overspill estate near the Cheshire town of Hyde. Ian and Myra became friendly with Patricia Hodges, the 11-year-old daughter of a neighbor. Hodges accompanied the couple on their trips to Saddleworth Moor to collect peat, something that many households on the new estate did to improve the soil in their gardens, which were full of clay and builder's rubble. The couple never harmed Hodges since she lived only a few doors away, which would have made it easier for the police to solve any disappearance. That's the only reason they didn't do it. Because they felt she was too close and they could connect it back to them, and thus the other murders, right? Early on Boxing Day in 1964, Myra left her grandmother at a relative's house and refused to allow her back to the Whortlebrook Avenue home that night.
She said, you can't come home.
That same day, 10-year-old Leslie Ann Downey disappeared from a fun fair in Ancoats.
Why are you motherfuckers killing kids?
Despite a large search, she was not found. Her stepfather, Alan West, was treated as a suspect by police and repeatedly questioned over her disappearance, but no evidence was uncovered and the disappearance remained unsolved for nearly a year. And the following day, Myra brought her grandmother back home.
Why are you motherfuckers killing kids?
By February of 1965, Hodges stopped visiting the Whortlebrook Avenue home, but David Smith, the brother-in-law, was still a regular visitor. Ian gave David books to read, and the two discussed robbery and murder.
Oh, okay.
On Myra's 23rd birthday in July of 1965, her sister and brother-in-law, who had then been living with different relatives at the time, were rehoused in Underwood Court, a new multi-story block of flats not far from the Whortlebrook Avenue home. The two couples began to see each other more regularly, but usually only under Ian's terms. So, like, they couldn't just show up unless Ian was like, yeah, come over, I'm going to invite you. It had to be his say or no. It wasn't happening. So now we're going to get a little kind of more into the murders, what happened.
Blah, 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 blah. Did they say, like, why they picked who they did?
Kind of, for the most part, yeah.
Because they're so fucking young.
Yeah, for the most part. Primarily because the young ones are easy to lure away.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
So the first victim, Pauline Reed, on July 12th of 1963, again, like Myra had said prior, Ian told her that he wanted to commit, quote-unquote, the perfect murder. After work, he instructed her to drive a borrowed van around the area while he followed on his motorcycle. When he spotted a likely victim, he would flash his headlights. Driving down Gorton Lane, Ian saw a young girl and signaled Myra, who did not stop because she recognized the girl as an 8-year-old neighbor of her mother. Sometime after 7:30 p.m., Ian signaled Myra to stop for 16-year-old Pauline Reed, a school meet of Maureen's, who was on Foxmer Street and on her way to a dance. Myra stopped and offered Pauline a ride. And Pauline was like, yeah, you're my friend's sister. This doesn't seem suspicious at all. I'll take the ride. Once Pauline was in the van, Myra asked for her help in searching the Saddleworth Moor for an expensive lost glove. Pauline agreed, and they drove there. When Ian arrived on his motorcycle, Myra told Pauline he would also be assisting with the search. Myra claims to have stayed in the van while Ian took Pauline into the moor. Ian arrived back at the van about 30 minutes later and took Myra to the spot where Pauline lay dying. Pauline's clothes were in disarray, and she had been nearly decapitated by 2 cuts to the throat, including a 4-inch incision across her voice box, quote, inflicted with considerable force, and into which the collar of her coat and a throat chain, which would be like a necklace, had been pushed. When Myra asked Ian whether he had raped Pauline, Ian replied, quote, of course I did. Like it was the stupidest fucking question in the world.
Oh, what the?
Right?
Okay.
Myra stayed with Pauline while Ian retrieved a spade he had hidden nearby on a previous visit, then returned to the van while Ian buried Pauline. However, in Ian's account, Myra was not only present for the attack, but participated in the rape. So, the second victim, John Kilbride, in the early evening of November 23rd of 1963 at a market in Ashton-under-Lyne, Ian and Myra offered 12-year-old John Kilbride a lift home, also promising him a bottle of sherry. Once John was inside Myra's hired Ford Angelia car, Ian said they would have to make a detour to their home for the sherry. Ian then suggested another detour, this time to search for a glove that Myra had lost on Saddleworth Moor. When they reached the moor, Ian took John with him while Myra waited in the car. Ian raped John and tried to slit his throat with a 6-inch serrated blade before strangling him with a shoelace or string. They really weren't super sure what it was. He then buried John's body in a shallow grave and at some point afterwards photographed Myra and her pet dog Puppet standing atop the recently disturbed ground. This comes into play later. We'll talk about it.
What, the photo?
Uh-huh. Because it's not just one.
Okay.
And we'll find out what the photos mean and like how it was used in the investigation. I don't want to jump into that like too soon. So another was Keith Bennett. Early in the evening of June 16 of 1964, Myra asked 12-year-old Keith Bennett, who was on his way to his grandmother's house in Longsight, for help in loading some boxes into her minivan, after which she said she'd drive him to his grandma's house. Ian was in the back of the van waiting. Myra drove to a lay-by on Saddleworth Moor, and Ian went off with Keith, supposedly looking for, again, a lost glove. After about 30 minutes, Ian returned alone, carrying a spade that he had hidden there earlier. Again, he takes it with him and then he brings it back. And in response to Myra's questions, said that, yeah, he raped and strangled Keith. So, Leslie Ann Downey, which was their, fourth victim? Ian and Myra visited a fun fair, which is like exactly what it sounds like. It's like a festival affair in Ancoats on December 26th, the day after Christmas of 1964, and noticed that 10-year-old Leslie Ann Downey was alone. All of these children had been abducted because there was nobody around to stop them. So that was their primary motive. They approached her and deliberately dropped some shopping they were carrying and then asked for her help in taking the packages to their car and then to their Wardlebrook Avenue home. At the house, Downey was undressed, gagged, and forcibly posed for photographs before being raped and killed, strangled like the rest. The attack was recorded on reel-to-reel audio tape with both Ian and Myra's voices appearing as their victims screamed and begged for mercy. Myra later maintained that she went to run a bath for Downey and found the victim dead when she returned. Ian claimed that Myra was the one that actually killed the little girl. The following morning, Ian and Myra drove Downey's body to Saddleworth Moor and buried her, naked with her clothes at her feet in a shallow grave. So, their next murder, and I think this is the final murder. I believe this is the final murder. On the evening of October 6th of 1965, Myra drove Ian to Manchester Central Railway Station, where she waited outside in the car while he selected a victim. After a few minutes, Ian reappeared in the company of 17-year-old Edward Evans, an apprentice engineer who lived in Ardwick, to whom he introduced Myra as his sister.
Okay.
Ian later claimed that he had picked up Edward for a sexual encounter. So,
okay.
There's that. They drove to Ian and Myra's home at Whortlebrook Avenue, where they relaxed over a bottle of wine. At some point, Ian sent Myra to fetch David Smith, again, who is her brother-in-law. Although Myra's family had not approved of Maureen's marriage to David, Ian had been cultivating a friendship with him, which increasingly worried Myra as she felt it compromised their safety. She was like, "You're getting too close to him. You're starting to tell him too much. I don't think we can trust him. He's gonna get us caught." Guess what happened? Myra returned with David and told him to wait outside for her signal, which would be a flashing light. When the signal came, David knocked on the door and was met by Ian, who asked if he had come for, quote, the miniature wine bottles, and left him in the kitchen saying that he was going to go collect the wine. David later told police, "I waited about a minute or two, then suddenly I heard a hell of a scream. It sounded like a woman, really high-pitched. Then the screams carried on, one after another, really loud. Then I heard Myra shout, 'Dave, help him,' very loud. When I ran in, I just stood inside the living room and I saw a young lad. He was lying with his head and shoulders on the couch and his legs were on the floor. He was facing upward. Ian was standing over him, facing him with legs on either side of the young lad's legs. The lad was still screaming. Ian had a hatchet in his hand. He was holding it above his head, and he hit the lad on the left side of his head with the hatchet. I heard the blow. It was a terrible, hard blow. It sounded horrible." David then watched Ian throttle Edward with a length of electrical cord. Ian sprained his ankle in the struggle, and Edward's body was too heavy for David to carry to the car on his own, so they wrapped it in a plastic sheeting and put it in the spare bedroom with the intention of disposing it later. So, after the murder of Edward, David agreed to return the following morning to help transport the body to the car before disposing of it on the Saddleworth Moor. He arrived home around 3 a.m. and asked his wife to make a cup of tea, which he drank before violently vomiting and telling her everything. At 6:10 a.m., having waited for the daylight and armed with a screwdriver and a bread knife, just in case Ian was watching him and planned to intercept him, he's trying to protect himself. He did the right thing.
Yeah.
He called the police from a phone box on the estate. He was picked up from the phone box by police and was taken to the Hyde police station, where he told the officers what he witnessed the previous night. So he did the right thing. Police Superintendent Bob Talbot of Stally Bridge Police Division went to Whortlebrook Avenue home, accompanied by a detective sergeant. Wearing a bread delivery man's overall on top of his uniform, he asked Myra at the back door if her husband was home. When she denied that she had a husband or that a man was in the house at all, Talbot identified himself.
He said, "Bitch, I'm an officer."
As a detective. Myra was like, "Oh, shit."
Oh, shit.
And led him into the living room, where Ian was laying on a divan, writing to his employer about his ankle injury. He's like, "Bro, Seth, I hurt my ankle. I can't work, my guy. I need time off." So, Talbot explained that he was investigating, quote, "an act of violence involving guns that was reported to have taken place the previous evening." Myra denied that there had been any violence and allowed police to look around the house. When the police asked for the key to the locked spare bedroom, she said it was at her workplace. But after the police offered to take her to retrieve it, Ian was just like, "Just fucking give it to them. We're not getting out of this."
No.
Edward's body was discovered in the bedroom, and Ian was arrested on suspicion of murder. As Ian was getting dressed, he said, "Eddie and I had a row of cocaine, and the situation got out of hand." Okay. Call the fucking police. Don't put him in your spare bedroom. I mean, obviously, we know that wasn't the case, but if that had been the case, like, fucking call the cops.
Yeah.
Though Myra was not initially arrested, she demanded to go with Ian to the police station, also taking her dog Puppet. She refused to make any statement about Edward's death beyond claiming it had been an accident, and was allowed to go home on the condition that she return the next day. Over the next 4 days, Myra visited her employer and asked to be dismissed so she would be eligible for unemployment benefits. On one of these occasions, she found an envelope belonging to Ian, which she burned in an ashtray. She claimed she didn't open it, but believed it contained plans for bank robberies. We don't know. She burned it. She may have actually have read it, but she's not going to admit to anything. Anyway, in the meantime, police were uncovering more evidence and became convinced that Myra was actively involved in the murder of Edward and other possible victims. On October 11th, she was arrested and taken into custody. She was charged as an accessory to murder for the murder of Edward and remanded at Risley Prison. Police searching the Wardlebrook Avenue home found an old exercise book with the name John Kilbride on it, which made them suspect that Ian and Myra had been involved in the unsolved disappearance of other children and teenagers. Ian told police that he and Edward had fought, but insisted that he and David had murdered him and that Myra had, quote, only done what she had been told. David said that Ian had asked him to return anything incriminating, such as, quote, dodgy books, which Ian packed into suitcases. He had no idea what else the suitcases contained or where they might be, though he mentioned that Ian, quote, had a thing about railway stations. A search of left luggage offices turned up the suitcases at Manchester Central Station on October 15th. The claimed ticket was later found in Myra's prayer book. Inside one of the cases were, among an assortment of costumes, notes, photographs, and negatives, 9 pornographic photographs of a young girl, soon identified as Leslie Ann Downey, naked with the scarf tied across her mouth, and a 16-minute audio tape recording of a girl identifying herself and screaming, crying, and pleading to be allowed to return home to her mother. She was 10. Let that sink in. She was 10 fucking years old. Downey's mother was asked by police to look at the 2 photographs, which were deemed appropriate in order to identify her daughter. So they kind of like, out of the 9, they chose 2 that weren't like horrific. Yeah. They all were horrific. But the least horrific, yeah. Just enough to be able to be like, yeah, that's her. Yeah. And also verified that the voice from the recording too was of her daughter. So this woman had to fucking sit there and listen to her daughter crying and screaming and begging to be let go. Like, I can't. It makes me sick. Officers making inquiries at neighboring houses spoke to Hodges, who was that 11-year-old neighbor, who had on several occasions been taken to Saddleworth Moor by Ian and Myra and was able to point out their favorite sites along A635 Road. Police immediately began to search the area and October 16th found an arm bone protruding from the peat, which was presumed at first to be that of John Kilbride, but was later identified later as that of Leslie Ann Downey, whose body was still visually identifiable. Her mother was able to identify the clothing, which again was buried at her feet in the shallow grave. Among photographs in the suitcase were a number of scenes of the moors. This is where we're going back to where these pictures meant something. Yeah. David told police that Ian had boasted of, quote, photographic proof of multiple murders, and officers struck by Ian's decision to remove the apparently, quote, innocent landscapes from the house appealed to the locals for assistance in finding locations to match the photographs. So he was taking photographs after the burial of the burial spots, but it just looked like nature pictures. Yeah. So that's like the importance of these pictures. On October 21st, they found the, quote, badly decomposed body of John Kilbride, which his mother had to identify by his clothing. That same day, already being held for the murder of Edward Evans, Ian and Myra appeared at the Hyde Magistrates Court and were charged with Downey's murder. Each was brought before the court separately and remanded into custody for a week. They made a 2-minute appearance on October 28th and were again remanded into custody. Investigating officers suspected Ian and Myra of murdering other missing children and teenagers who had disappeared from areas in and around Manchester over the previous few years. The search continued for a while after the discovery of John Kilbride's body, But with winter setting in, it was called off in November. Various newspapers were also naming other, quote, potential victims of, quote, the Moores murders, with Pauline Reed and Keith Bennett being two of them. Presented with evidence of the tape recording, Ian admitted to taking the photographs of Downey, but insisted she had been brought to the Wardbrook Avenue home by two men who had subsequently taken her away again alive. What? By December 2nd, Ian had been charged with the murders of John Kilbride, Leslie Ann Downey, and Edward Evans. Myra had been charged with the murders of Leslie Ann Downey and Edward Evans, and as an accessory to the murder of John Kilbride, as well as harboring Ian in the knowledge that he had killed John Kilbride.
Yeah.
The prosecution's opening statement was held in chambers rather than in open court, and the defense asked for similar stipulations, but was refused. The court was like, no, you don't get privacy.
No.
The proceedings continued before three magistrates in Hyde over an 11-day period during December, at the end of which the pair were committed for trial at Chester Assize. I don't know what that means. More of the photographs taken by Ian and Myra on the moor featured Myra's dog, Puppet, sometimes as a puppy. To help date the photos, detectives had a veterinarian surgeon examine the dog to determine its age. The examination, this is going to suck. The examination required a general anesthetic from which Puppet never recovered.
No!
Yep.
Puppet didn't do nothing.
Very sad. Myra was furious, understandably, and accused the police of murdering the dog to spite her. This was one of the very few times that detectives actually witnessed any kind of emotional response from her. It was over her dog.
I mean, fuck, me too, man.
I mean, me too, but like over killing a human, like nothing.
Nothing.
You know?
She didn't care.
No. Myra wrote to her mother, quote, I feel as though my heart's been torn to pieces. I don't think anything could hurt me more than this has. The only consolation is that some moron might have got a hold of Puppet and hurt him.
I mean, at least he kind of died in his sleep.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's so sad.
I know. So the 14-day trial began in a specially prepared courtroom at Chester Aziz before Mr. Justice Fenton Atkinson on April 19th of 1966. The dock was fitted with bulletproof glass to protect Ian and Myra because it was feared that someone might try to kill them.
Probably.
Such was the public outrage at the time of the crimes.
Probably.
Other elaborate security precautions included a public address system costing £2,500 and a telephone equipment costing £500. So they put some money into protecting these two fucking douchebags.
Because they're like, we want answers. And
yeah.
If y'all kill them,
right.
we're
not going to get
anything.
anything. We're not going to get justice.
Yeah.
National and international journalists covering the trial booked up most of the city's hotel rooms. Onlookers would stand outside Chester Aziz every day during the trial.
Damn.
They came out in droves. Ian and Myra were charged with murdering Edward Evans, Leslie Ann Downey, and John Kilbride. The Attorney General, Sir Elwyn Jones, led the prosecution, assisted by William Mars Jones. Ian was defended by Emily Hewson QC, the Liberal Member of Parliament, and Myra was defended by Godfrey Hypern, QC, Recorder of Salford from 1964. Both were experienced Queen's Counsel, so public defenders, basically.
Yeah.
They're just called the Queen's Counsel. David Smith was the chief prosecuting witness because he saw them murder Edward Evans. Before the trial, the News of the World newspaper offered £1,000 to David for the rights to his story. The American People magazine made a competing offer for £6,000.
Damn.
When David accepted the News of the World's offer, £1,000, its editors promised additional future payments for syndication and serialization, and he agreed to be paid £15 per week until the trial, and then $1,000 in a lump sum if Ian and Myra were convicted. During the trial, the judge and defense barristers repeatedly questioned David and Maureen about the nature of the arrangement. At first, David refused to name the paper, risking contempt of court. When he eventually identified the newspaper, Jones, again the Attorney General, immediately promised an investigation. So he's like, you're doing something illegal. I'm going to investigate. And this kind of like fucks things up for them for like the rest of the time. Not Ian and Myra, for David and Maureen. It fucks things up for them.
Because he's investigating the newspaper?
Because David is profiting off of this case. Yeah, we'll get into it.
Dumbass.
Yeah. Both Ian and Myra enter pleas of not guilty. Ian testified for over 8 hours, Myra for 6. Ian admitted to striking Edward Evans with the axe, but claimed that someone else had killed him.
Of course.
Pointing to the pathologist's statement that his death had been, quote, accelerated by strangulation, despite being the one accused of strangling him.
What?
Ian's, quote, calm, undisguised arrogance did not endear him to the jury, and neither did his pedantry.
His what?
Pedantry. Excessive, often annoying obsession with minor details, rules, technicalities, like nitpicking.
Okay.
Yeah, like nitpicking. Wrote Duncan's staff. Myra denied any knowledge that the photographs of Saddleworth Moor found by police had been taken near the graves of their victims.
Of course
She's
not.
like, I didn't know. I didn't know that.
I thought we were just taking pictures.
The 16-minute tape recording of Leslie Ann Downey, on which the voices of Ian and Myra were highly audible, was played in open court. Myra admitted that her attitude towards Leslie Ann Downey was burlesque and cruel, but claimed that was only because she was afraid that someone might hear the child's screams. Myra claimed that when Leslie Ann Downey was being undressed, she herself was, quote, downstairs. When the pornographic photos were taken, she was, quote, looking out the window.
Uh-huh.
And that when Leslie Ann was being strangled to death, she was, quote, running her a bath.
Uh-huh.
On May 6th, after having deliberated for over 2 hours, the jury found Ian guilty of all 3 murders and Myra guilty of the murders of Leslie Ann Downey and Edward Evans. As the death penalty for murder had been abolished 6 months earlier, the judge passed the only sentence that the law now allowed for murder, which was life imprisonment. Ian was sentenced to 3 concurrent life sentences, and Myra was given 2, plus a concurrent 7-year term for harboring Ian in the knowledge that he had murdered John Kilbride. Ian was taken to Durham Prison, and Myra was sent to Holloway Prison. Again, concurrent means back to back.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't understand. When
the bitches aren't getting out.
Well, yeah, it's a back-to-back sentence. It's not running with the sentence. You know, it's not together. It is once the sentence is over for 40 years, you get 40 more. You get 40 more. You get 40 more. You're not serving 3 40-year life sentences in 40 years.
Yeah.
You're serving 3 40-year sentences in 120 years.
Yes.
That's life. You know, pretty much like no one's living that long.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when like you're already in your 30s, 20s, 30s, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
In his closing remarks, Mr. Justice Atkinson described the murders as truly horrible and the accused as, quote, 2 sadistic killers of the utmost depravity. And he is not wrong. He recommended they spend, quote, a very long time in prison before being considered for parole, but did not stipulate a tariff, which in these terms means like a minimum sentence. So he's like, they deserve to spend a very long time in prison, but I can't tell you how long that is going to be. So anyone sentenced to life imprisonment would be liable to spend the rest of his or her natural life in prison, but could be paroled on the life license by the Home Secretary on recommendation of the parole board. So even if they're sentenced to life in prison, at some point they could be offered parole.
Hell no.
Yeah, at some point they could. At the recommendation of the parole board, you know, just Atkinson described it as, quote, wicked beyond belief, and he saw no reasonable possibility or reform and suitability for parole for him, though he did not think the same necessarily true of Myra once, quote, removed from Ian's influence. So, and that was like one of her biggest things was she was influenced by Ian. She was threatened. She was terrorized. She was scared.
She bought the fucking guns. She got the fucking cars.
She was obsessed with Ian. Ian wasn't paying her any attention for almost a full year.
She knew what she was doing.
Yeah. No, she absolutely knew what she was doing, and I do believe she did it willingly.
Mm-hmm.
I do not believe that she was under the influence.
Hell no. She was obsessed with Ian since day one.
Yeah. So throughout the trial, Myra and Ian stuck rigidly to their strategy of lying, and Myra was later described as, quote, quiet, controlled, impassive witness who lied remorselessly. So since the initial search of the Moors began in October of 1965, the national media had been keen to naming missing children and teenagers from the region as possible victims. These included Stephen Jennings, who was a 3-year-old West Yorkshire boy who was last seen alive in December of 1962. His body was found buried in a field in 1988, so 26 years later.
Mm-hmm.
But the following year, his father, William Jennings, was found guilty of his murder. And Jennifer Teague, a 14-year-old girl who disappeared from Oldham Children's Home in December of 1964, was mentioned in the press more than 40 years later as a possible victim. But in April of 2010, so 16 years ago, it was confirmed by Greater Manchester Police she was actually alive.
They're like, no, she's still alive. She ain't dead.
She was alive. They didn't say she was dead. She had disappeared. She just disappeared. But in 16 years ago,
like,
they were like,
she's probably like, damn it, guys, I was trying to hide.
She's alive. So, whoopsie daisy. So, in 1985, Ian allegedly told Fred Harrison, a journalist working for the Sunday People, that he killed Pauline Reed and Keith Bennett, something police already suspected and knew, as both lived near Ian and Myra and had disappeared during the first half of the 1960s. So the police kind of already knew this. They just didn't have the evidence because they couldn't find the bodies. So he finally admitted to it. Greater Manchester Police reopened the investigation, now to be headed by Detective Chief Superintendent Peter Topping, head of the GMP's Criminal Investigation Department. On July 3rd of 1985, DCS Topping visited Ian, then being held at Gartrey Prison in Leicestershire.
Yeah.
Leicestershire. I have to ask my grandma how to pronounce these fucking UK names because I never know.
You should have asked her.
I didn't think about it. I was too busy asking her about the people we were related to yesterday.
Oh.
Yeah.
Does she know?
Oh, yeah, she knew.
Oh.
Oh, she knew.
Oh.
Yeah. But found him, quote, scornful of any suggestion that he had confessed to more murders. So the detective was like, this is what I heard. And Ian's like, LOL, no. Did not do that. Police nevertheless decided to resume their search of Saddleworth Moor, once more using the photographs taken by Ian and Myra to help them identify possible burial sites. In November of 1986, a year after I was born, Keith Bennett's mother wrote to Myra begging to know what happened to her son, a letter that Myra seemed to be, quote, genuinely moved by.
Uh-huh.
It ended, quote, I am a simple woman. I work in the kitchens of Christie's Hospital. It has taken me 5 weeks of labor to write this letter because it is so important to me that it is understood by you for what it is, a plea for help. Please, Miss Henley, help me. It was so hard to write this letter to her that it took her 5 weeks. 5 weeks to write this letter.
Did she respond?
Not to this one.
I'm sorry.
I had a scare.
I'm sorry.
Hi, baby. She's like, what is happening?
Yeah, she scratched my leg.
She thought you were attacking me. She's like, stop hurting my mom. Hi, baby.
I didn't even do anything.
Oh, hi, baby. I'm so sorry. Hey. Police visited Myra, then being held at Cookham Wooden Prison in Kent a few days after she received the letter, and although she refused to admit any involvement in the killings, she agreed to help by looking at the photographs and maps to try to identify the spots she had visited with Ian. She showed particular interest in photos of the area around Holland Brown Knoll and Shiny Brook, but said that it was impossible to be sure of the locations without actually visiting the moor. Home Secretary Douglas Hurd agreed with Topping that a visit would be worth risking despite security problems presented by threats against Myra. Writing in 1989, Topping said that he felt, quote, quite cynical about Myra's motivation in helping police. Although Winnie Johnson's letter may have played a part, he believed that Myra, knowing of Ian's, quote, precarious mental state, was concerned he might cooperate with the police and reap any available public approval benefit. So the only reason she agreed to help the police is so Ian couldn't do it first. And she would get the benefit of assisting the police in cooperation, which could be like a reduced sentence or, anything like that. On December 16th of 1986, Myra made the first of 2 visits to assist the police search of the moor. Police closed all roads onto the moor, which was patrolled by 200 officers, some armed, to protect Myra, although they shouldn't have.
Nope.
Myra and her solicitor, which is an attorney, left Cookland Wood at 4:30 a.m., flew to the moor by helicopter from an airfield near Maidstone, and then were driven and walked around the area until 3 p.m. that afternoon. Myra had difficulty connecting what she saw to her memories and was apparently nervous about the helicopters flying overhead. The press described the visit as a, quote, fiasco, quote, a publicity stunt, and, quote, mindless waste of money. But Topping defended it, saying, quote, we needed a thorough systematic search of the moor. It would have never been possible to carry out such a search in private. On December 19th, David Smith, then 38, spent about 4 hours on the moor helping police identify additional areas to be searched. Topping continued to visit Myra in prison, along with her solicitor, Michael Fisher, and her spiritual counselor, Peter Timms, who had been a prison governor before becoming a Methodist minister. On February 10th of 1987, Myra formally confessed to involvement in all 5 murders, and this was not made public for more than 1 month. The tape recording of her statement was over 17 hours long. Topping described it as a, quote, very well worked out performance in which, I believe, she told me just as much as she wanted me to know and no more.
Pretty much.
He added that he was struck by the fact that, in Myra's telling, she was never there when the killings took place. She was in the car, over the brow of the hill, in the bathroom, and even in the case of Evan Edwards' murder, just in the kitchen. He felt he, quote, had witnessed a great performance rather than a genuine confession. Topping was also among those who would go on to publicly express doubt over whether Myra's reported remorse and rehabilitation were genuine rather than a mere ploy to boost her chances of parole. Police visited Ian in prison again and told him of Myra's confession, which he initially refused to believe. Once presented with some of the details that Myra had provided of Pauline Reed's abduction, Ian decided that he, too, was prepared to confess, but on one condition, that immediately afterwards he be given the means to commit suicide, a request with which it was impossible for the authorities to comply. You should have just let him do it.
Should have.
At about the same time, Johnson, which again is Keith Bennett's mother, sent Myra another letter, again pleading with her to assist police in finding the body of her son, Keith Bennett. In the letter, Johnson was sympathetic to Myra over the criticism surrounding her first visit. Myra, who had not replied to the first letter, responded by thanking Johnson for both letters and explaining that her decision to not reply to the first letter was a result of the negative publicity that surrounded the entire case.
It ain't gonna be positive public.
Yeah, I know, but that was like her thing. She's like, I guess she didn't want to make it worse for herself by responding to the letter. She claimed that had Johnson written to her 14 years earlier, she would have confessed then and helped the police find him because her memory would have been so much better.
Sure, bitch, sure.
Yeah. She also paid tribute to Topping and thanked Johnson for her sincerity. Myra made her second visit to the moor in March of 1987. This time, the level of security surrounding her visit was considerably higher. She stayed overnight in Manchester at the flat of the police chief in charge of GMP training at Sedgley Park and visited the moor twice. Myra confirmed to police that the 2 areas in which they were concentrating their search, Holland Brown Knoll and Hougreen, were correct, although she was unable to locate either of the graves. She did, though, later remember that as Pauline Reed was being buried, she had been sitting next to her on a patch of grass and could see the rocks of Holland Brown Knoll silhouetted against the night sky. In April of 1987, news of Myra's confession became public. Again, remember, they sat on this for a whole entire month. Mm-hmm. Amidst strong media interest, Lord Longford renewed his call for Myra to be paroled, writing that continuing her detention to satisfy, quote, mob emotion was not right. Fisher persuaded Myra to release a public statement which touched on her reasons for denying her guilt previously, her religious experiences in prison, and the letters from John Johnson. Everybody finds Jesus in prison. Everybody. No, they don't. She said she saw no possibility of release and also exonerated David Smith from any part in the murders other than that of Edward Evans, and he didn't participate in that. He just happened to be there because he was tricked to come.
Yeah.
He was tricked into coming. And he did the right fucking thing. Yeah. He went to the police. Over the next few months, interest in the search waned, but Myra's clue had focused efforts on a specific area. Again, the clue was seeing the rocks against the silhouette in the backdrop. On July 1st, after more than 100 days of searching, they finally found Pauline Reed's body 3 feet below the surface, 100 yards from where Leslie Ann Downey had been found. Ian had been cooperating with police for quite some time, and when this news reached him, he made a formal confession to Topping, and in a statement to the press said that he too would help police in their search.
He said, "I'm gonna help now."
Yeah, he was taken to the morgue on July 3rd, but seemed to lose his bearings, blaming changes.
Of course he did.
Blaming changes in the intervening years. The search was called off at 3 p.m., by which time a large crowd of press and television reporters had gathered at the morgue. Topping refused to allow Ian a second visit to the morgue before police called off their search on August 24th. Ian was taken to the morgue a second time on December 8th and claimed to have located Keith Bennett's burial site, but the body was never found. Soon after his first visit to the morgue, Ian wrote a letter to a BBC reporter giving some sketchy details of 5 additional deaths that he claimed to have been involved in. 1, a man in the Piccadilly area of Manchester. 2, another victim on Saddleworth Moor. 2 more in Scotland, and a woman whose body was allegedly dumped in a canal. Police, failing to discover any unsolved crimes matching the details that he supplied, decided that there was insufficient evidence to launch an official investigation. Myra told Topping that she knew nothing of these killings, so that led them to believe like this wasn't true.
Yeah.
Although Ian and Myra had confessed to the murders of Pauline Reed and Keith Bennett, the director of public prosecutions decided that nothing would be gained by a further trial, as both were already serving life sentences and no further punishment could be inflicted.
Yeah.
Like, they still couldn't be sentenced to death. In 2003, police launched Operation Maida and again searched the moor for Bennett's body, this time using sophisticated resources such as a U.S. reconnaissance satellite, which could detect soil disturbances. In mid-2009, GMP said they had exhausted all avenues in the search for Bennett, that, quote, only a major scientific breakthrough or fresh evidence would see the hunt for his body restart. It was stated that any further participation by Ian would be via, quote, a walkthrough of the moors virtually, using 3D modeling rather than him actually physically going to the moor.
Because he's not very useful.
At all. Donations from the public funded a search by volunteers from a Welsh search and rescue team in 2010. In 2012, it was claimed that Ian may have given details of the location of Keith Bennett's body to a prison visitor, a woman who was subsequently arrested on suspicion of preventing the burial of a body without lawful excuse. But a few months later, the Crown Prosecution Service announced that there was insufficient evidence to press charges. In 2017, the police asked a court to order that the 2 locked briefcases owned by Ian be opened, arguing that they might contain clues to the location of Bennett's body. The application was declined on the grounds that no prosecution was likely to result. So even if they found the evidence of where the body was, they were like, we're not approving this because you can't prosecute them further.
Yeah.
Never fucking mind that they could find evidence of where this body is for his mother's sake. Not for the opportunity of prosecution, for the opportunity of her being able to know where her child is.
Yeah.
She knows he's just dead, but he's just out there somewhere, you know? This would have given her closure. So I think it's bullshit. On September 30th of 2022, the GMP began a search for human remains on the moor after receiving information from an amateur investigator and author, Russell Edwards, who had reportedly found a skull. After seeing a photograph of a jawbone, a spokesperson for the police said of the identity of the remains that it was far too early to be certain. On October 1st, the police reported that no further remains had been found, and October 7th, the police announced that they had ended their search without finding any sign of human remains in the area. So, Ian, following his conviction, was moved to Durham Prison, where he asked to live in solitary confinement. He spent 19 years in mainstream prisons before being diagnosed as a psychopath in November of 1985 and sent to the high-security Parkland Hospital, which is now Ashworth Hospital, in Maghole, Merseyside. He made it clear he never wanted to be released.
She said almost a year.
The judge recommended that Ian's life sentence should mean life, and successive Home Secretaries agreed with that decision. In 1982, the Lord Chief Justice Lord Lane said of Ian, quote, "This is the case, if ever there is to be one, when a man should stay in prison until he dies." The November 2007 death of John Straffen, who had seen 55 years in prison for murdering 3 children, meant that Ian became the longest-serving prisoner in England and Wales.
Damn.
Although Ian refused to work with Ashworth's psychiatrists, he occasionally corresponded with people outside the hospital, subject to prison authority censorship, including Lord Longford, writer Colin Wilson, and various other journalists. In one letter written in 2005, Ian claimed that the murders were, quote, "merely an existential exercise of just over a year, which was concluded in December of 1964. No remorse. Didn't care. By then, he claimed he and Myra had turned their attention to armed robbery, for which they had begun to prepare for by acquiring guns and vehicles. Again, never came to fruition. During several years of interactions with forensic psychologist Chris Cowley, including face-to-face meetings, Ian told him of an aesthetic fascination he had with guns, despite never having used one to kill. Again, he never shot anybody. He strangled them, slit their throat. Mm-hmm. He complained bitterly about conditions at Ashworth, which he hated. In 1999, his right wrist was broken in what he claimed was a quote, hour-long unprovoked attack by staff.
Oh, sure.
Poor baby.
You poor thing.
Ian subsequently went on a hunger strike, but while English law allows patients to refuse treatment, those being treated for mental disorders under the Mental Health Act of 1983 have no such right in the treatment if the treatment is for their mental health disorder. So he was therefore force-fed and transferred to another hospital for tests after he fell ill.
He's like, just let me fucking die.
I wish they would have.
He wanted to die anyway.
Even Ian recovered and in March 2000 asked for a judicial review of the legality of the decision to force feed him, but was refused permission. He says, quote, "Myra gets the potentially fatal brain condition while I have to fight simply to die. I've had enough. I want nothing. My objective is to die and release myself from this once and for all. So you see, my death strike is rational and pragmatic. I'm only sorry I didn't do it decades ago, and I'm eager to leave this cesspit in a coffin."
I mean, the man wanted to die. Let the man die.
Right. In 2001, Ian wrote The Gates of Janus, which was published by American underground publisher Feral House. The book, Ian's analysis of serial murder and specific serial killers, sparked outrage when announced in the UK. In the book, Ian recounted his friendships in prison with the, quote, teacup prisoner Graham Young, who shared Ian's admiration for Nazi Germany. According to Crowley, Ian regretted Myra's imprisonment and the consequences of their actions, but not necessarily the crimes themselves. He saw no point in making any kind of public apology. Instead, he, quote, expressed remorse through actions. 20 years of transcribing classical text into Braille came to an end when the authorities confiscated Ian's translation machine for fear it might be used as a weapon either against someone or against himself. He once offered to donate one of his kidneys to, quote, anyone who needed one, but was blocked from doing so. According to Wilson, quote, it was because these attempts to express remorse were thrown back at him that he began to contemplate suicide. In 2006, officials intercepted 50 paracetamol, which is Tylenol, hidden inside a hollowed-out crime novel sent to Ian by a female friend. The mother of the remaining undiscovered victim, Keith Bennett, received a letter from Ian at the end of 2005 in which she said he claimed he could take police to within 20 yards of her son's body, but the authorities would not allow it. He did not refer directly to Bennett by name and did not claim he could take investigators directly to the grave, but spoke of the, quote, clarity of his recollections. In 2012, Ian applied to be returned to prison, reiterating his desire to starve himself to death. At a mental health tribunal in June the following year, he claimed that he suffered not from paranoid schizophrenia, as his doctors at Ashworth maintained, but a personality disorder. He did probably both.
Yes.
Ian's application was rejected, denied, and the judge stated that he, quote, continues to suffer from a mental disorder which is of a nature and degree which will make it appropriate for him to continue to receive medical treatment. After receiving end-of-life care, Ian died of restrictive pulmonary disease at Ashworth Hospital on May 15, 2017, so almost 10 years ago. The inquest found that he died of natural causes and that his hunger strike had not been a contributory factor, so he failed. He's a failure in all aspects of his life, and in his death. Ian had refused food and fluid for more than 48 hours on various occasions, causing him to be fitted with the nasogastric tube, which they put a tube in your nose hole, down your throat into your stomach, and force feed you. Yucky.
Ew.
Although his inquest noted that his body mass index was not a cause for concern, he was cremated without a ceremony, and his ashes were disposed of at sea during the night. Myra lodged an unsuccessful appeal against her conviction immediately after the trial. She corresponded with Ian by letter until 1971 when she ended their relationship.
Finally.
The two remained in sporadic contact for several months, but Myra had fallen in love with one of her prison wardens, Patricia Cairns. A former assistant governor claimed that such relationships were not unusual in Holloway at the time as, quote, many of the officers were gay and involved in relationships either with one another or with inmates. So they were like, that's normal.
I mean, that kind of makes sense, though, because that's literally who you see every day.
Exactly. Like, it makes sense, but why? It shouldn't be commonplace. That shouldn't be allowed. And I understand, like,
I mean, you can't help it.
You can't help it, but
it's like, why for one?
Yeah.
Like, murderers.
You're right.
Like, what the fuck? They're going to murder your... What the... Like,
I mean, come on.
They're not going anywhere. Why?
I mean, I guess maybe they thought they were safe because they were an adult and they only murdered kids. 17 was the oldest.
You never know.
Yeah, I know. So, Myra successfully petitioned to have her status as a Category A prisoner changed to Category B, which enabled Governor Dorothy Wing to take her on a walk around Hampstead Health, part of her unofficial policy of reintroducing her charges to the outside world when she felt they were ready. So, in order to kind of rehabilitate these people, they had to have their categories changed. Category A was like non-releasable, not rehabilitable, not gonna get out of jail ever. Category B was like possible, right? So this allowed this lady to kind of try to reintroduce Myra to the outside world. It didn't go well. The excursion caused a frenzy in the national press and earned Wing an unofficial rebuke from the then Home Secretary Robert Card. He was like, bad fucking idea. What is wrong with you? No. Yeah. With help from Cairns and outside contacts from another prisoner, Maxine Kropp, Myra planned a prison escape, but it was thwarted when impressions of the prison keys were intercepted by an off-duty policeman. Cairns was sentenced to 6 years in jail for her part in the plot.
Dumbass. So
she went from being the warden to an inmate. Myra was told that she should spend 25 years in prison before being considered for parole. The Lord Chief Justice agreed with that recommendation in 1982, but in January of 1985, Home Secretary Leon Britton increased her tariff to 30 years. Again, tariff is the minimum sentence.
Okay. And
by that time, of course, Myra claimed to be a Reformed Catholic. She found Jesus.
Of course.
She lost him because she grew up in the Catholic Church, right? I mean, she grew up in the Catholic Church, and she lost him after that, and then she found him again in 1985, somewhere in that area. Leslie Ann Downey's mother was at the center of a campaign to ensure that Myra was never released from prison, and until her death in February of 1999, she regularly gave television and newspaper interviews whenever Myra's release was rumored. In February of 1985, the Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher told Britain that the proposed minimum sentence of 35 years for Myra and 40 years for Ian were too short, saying, quote, I do not think that either of these prisoners should ever be released from custody. Their crime was the most hideous and cruel in modern times. In 1987, Myra admitted that the plea for parole she had submitted to the Home Secretary 8 years earlier was, quote, on the whole, a pack of lies. And to some reporters, her cooperation in the searches of Saddleworth Moor, quote, appeared a cynical gesture aimed at integrating herself to the parole authorities. Hi, baby.
You feel better now?
Oh, honey.
Your tail.
Oh, baby. Then Home Security David Waddington imposed a whole life order on Myra in July of 1990 after she confessed to having been more involved in the murders than she had initially admitted to. Oh, stinky. Myra was not informed of the decision until 1994 when a law lord's ruling obliged the prison service to inform all life sentence prisoners of the minimum period they must serve in prison before being considered for parole. In 1996, the parole board recommended that Myra be moved to an open prison. She rejected the idea and in early 1998 was moved to the medium security High Point prison. The law lord's ruling left open the possibility of later freedom. Between December 1997 and March of 2000, Myra made 3 separate appeals against her whole life order, claiming that she was a reformed woman and no longer a danger to society. But each was rejected by the courts. They said, LOL.
Hell no.
No. Try again.
Hell to the no, 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 no.
When in 2002, another life sentence prisoner challenged the Home Secretary's power to set minimum terms, Myra and hundreds of others whose tariffs had been increased by politicians looked likely to be released. Myra's release seemed imminent, and plans were made by supporters for her to be given a new identity.
Hell no.
Home Secretary David Blunkett ordered GMP to find new charges against Myra to prevent her release. The investigation was headed by Superintendent Tony Brett and initially looked by charging Myra with the murders of Pauline Reed and Keith Bennett. But the advice given by government lawyers was that because of the DPP's decision taken 15 years earlier, a new trial would probably be considered an abusive process. On November 25, 2002, the law lords agreed that judges, not politicians, should decide how long a criminal spends behind bars and stripped the Home Secretary of the power to set minimum sentences. Just prior to this, on November 15, 2002, Myra, age 60 and a chain smoker, died from bronchial pneumonia at West Suffolk Hospital.
Ya bitches.
10 days earlier.
She literally died.
10 days earlier than this ruling, she died.
Oh well.
She had been diagnosed with angina in 1999 and hospitalized after suffering a brain aneurysm. So that's where this brain thing that Ian was talking about, like, Myra gets this brain thing. I just want to starve myself to death. He was such a fucking whiner.
He really was.
Camera crews, quote, stood rank and file behind steel barriers outside, but none of Myra's relatives were among the small congregation of 8 to 10 people who attended a short service at Cambridge Crematorium. Such was the strength of feeling more than 35 years after the murders that a reported 20 local undertakers refused to handle her cremation. More than 20. 20 funeral homes said absolutely the fuck not. No. 4 months later, her ashes were scattered by her ex-partner, Patricia Cairns, less than 10 miles from Saddleworth Moor in Stalybridge County Park. The Manchester Evening News reported on possible fears that this would result in visitors choosing to avoid or vandalize the park. Like, I wouldn't want to go there either, the fuck?
Yeah.
David Smith became reviled by the people of Manchester for financially profiting from the murders and with public suspicion that he had been directly involved in the murders, even though Myra was like, he didn't have anything to do with it. During the trial, Maureen was 8 months pregnant, and she was actually attacked in the lift of the building in which both she and David lived. Their home was vandalized. They regularly received hate mail, and Maureen wrote that she could not let her children out of her sight when they were small because of people trying to attack them for what her sister did. Not looking at the fact that this man went to the police as soon as he could. Yeah. You know. After deciding to prosecute the News of the World, Attorney General Sir Elwyn Jones came under political pressure to impose new regulations on the press, but was reluctant to legislate on, quote, checkbook journalism. Instead, he accepted the offer of the Press Council to produce a, quote, Declaration of Principle, which was published in November of 1966 and included rules forbidding criminal witnesses to be paid or interviewed. But the News of the World promptly rejected the declaration, and the council had no power to enforce its provisions. After stabbing another man in a fight, in an attack he claimed was triggered by the abuse he had suffered since the trial, David Smith was sentenced to 3 years in prison in 1969. That same year, his children were taken into the care of the local authorities. Maureen moved from Underwood Court to a bedsit in another district and found work in a department store. It doesn't really explain why the children were taken, but they were taken from him and her. But it doesn't explain why.
Okay.
Maybe like a safety concern, but it doesn't get into why they took the children.
Yeah.
Subjected,
like, protect them, please.
Yeah, I mean, it could be anything.
Yeah.
Subjected to whispering campaigns and petitions to remove her from the estate where she lived, Maureen received no support from her family, although her mother had supported Myra during the trial and did not contact Maureen again until the early 70s.
Why the fuck would you support the murderer?
I don't know.
And not the other one?
I don't know. I guess because Maureen was an embarrassment since the age of 18 when she was 7 months pregnant.
Probably.
On his release from prison, David Smith began a relationship with the 15-year-old.
What the fuck?
Who became his second wife and won custody of his 3 sons. So whatever the situation was, like, Maureen was the problem.
Okay.
Because he was in jail when the kids were taken, right?
Okay,
Maureen moved and did whatever. And eventually when he got out, he won custody. And let me tell you, I don't know if the UK is a mother country like it is in the United States, but it is very, very, very hard.
She couldn't keep a job because of who her sister was. Because they figured, oh, you're related to her.
It's very hard for the dad to get full custody.
Yeah.
Very hard. Because they have to prove unfit. And a job really wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
Not full custody. They'd be like, you can have supervised visitation or whatever, but they wouldn't normally like just strip all of the custody at one time. Maureen managed to repair the relationship with her mother and moved into a council property in Gorton. She divorced David in 1973 and married a lorry driver, Bill Scott, with whom she had a daughter. In 1980, Maureen suffered a brain hemorrhage. Myra was allowed to visit her in the hospital, but arrived an hour after Maureen had died. Sheila and Patrick Kilbride, I love this. It kind of sucks, but I also love this. Sheila and Patrick Kilbride were by that time divorced, but they attended Maureen's funeral thinking that Myra might be there.
The fuck?
Patrick mistook Bill Scott's daughter, his first daughter from his first marriage, for Myra and tried to kill her.
What the fuck?
Shortly before her death at the age of 70, Sheila said, quote, "If she, Myra, ever comes out of jail, I will kill her."
Yeah. Okay.
Her son Danny was like, Mama said she killed that bitch. Pauline Reed's mother was admitted to Springfield Mental Hospital in Manchester. She was present under heavy sedation at the funeral of her daughter on August 7th of 1987. 5 years after their son was murdered, Sheila and Patrick Kilbride divorced. So again, I said they were divorced by the time that Maureen died, but it was 5 years after the boy went missing. And, you know. Ann West, the mother of Leslie and Downey, died in February of 1999 after a long battle with cancer. Aww. She had been at the center of the campaign to ensure that Myra remained in prison, and doctors said that the stress had contributed to the severity of her illness. Keith Bennett's mother continued to visit Saddleworth Moor, where it is believed that Bennett is buried. She died of cancer in August of 2012 at the age of 78, so she never got answers.
Yeah.
Manchester City Council decided in 1987 to demolish the house in which Ian and Myra had lived on Wardlebrook Avenue and where Downey and Evans were murdered, citing, quote, excessive media interest in the property, creating unpleasantness for residents. In November 2017, it was revealed that without the knowledge of her family, this is so gross, some of Pauline Reed's remains, including her jawbone, had been kept at the University of Leeds by Greater Manchester Police.
Why?
GMP apologized to the Reed family, and in October 2010, her remains were reburied at her grave in Gorton Cemetery in Manchester.
Why the fuck would you keep what the fuck?
So the photographs and tape recordings of the torture of Leslie Ann Downey exhibited in court and the nonchalant responses of Ian and Myra helped to ensure their lasting notoriety. Ian, who said that he did not want to be released, was rarely mentioned in the news, but Myra's insistent desire to be released contributed to her continuing status as a figure of public hate, especially as she failed to confess to involvement in the Reed and Bennett murders for 20 years. Myra's role in the crimes also violated gender norms. Her betrayal of the maternal role fed public perceptions of her, quote, inherent evil. and made her a, quote, poster girl for moral panic about serial murder and pedophilia in subsequent decades. Her often reprinted mugshot, taken shortly after she was arrested, is described by some commentators as similar to the mythical Medusa, and according to author Helen Birch, had become, quote, synonymous with the idea of feminine evil. At the 1997 Sensation Art exhibit, the painting Myra caused controversy and was a reproduction of Myra's mugshot shortly after she was arrested, composed of children's handprints. Given Myra's status as co-defendant in the first serial murder trial held since the abolition of the death penalty, retribution was a common theme among those who were determined that she should not be released from prison. Even Myra's mother insisted that she should die in prison, partly for fear for Myra's safety. Some commentators expressed the view that of the two, Myra was the more evil.
I could believe that because she's the one that bought the guns, all that shit.
Yeah.
And Ian just
and she was really also the one that kind of hunted for the victims. Like, they were both hunting, but, I mean, she was the one that lured them in. She kind of
did more of the work. Ian just kind of raped them,
killed them,
strangled them.
That's it.
That's it.
Yeah.
And buried them.
Right.
She did everything else.
Right. Lord Longford, a Catholic convert, campaigned to secure the release of, quote, celebrated criminals, and Myra in particular, which earned him constant derision from the public and the tabloid media. He described Myra as a, quote, delightful person, and said, quote, you could loathe what people did, but should not loathe what they were, because human personality was sacred, even though human behavior was very often appalling.
The fuck?
No. Tabloid newspapers branded him a loony and a do-gooder for supporting Myra, whom they described as evil. Myra became a long-running source of material for the press, which printed embellished tales of her, quote, cushy life at the, quote, 5-star Cockham prison and her liaisons with prison staff and other inmates. The book The Loathsome Couple by Edward Gorey was inspired by the Moors murders. Manchester band The Smith song Suffer Little Children from their 1984 self-titled debut album was also inspired by the case. The case was featured in 2 television dramas in 2006, See No Evil, The Moors Murders, and Longford. The episode White Bear from the Netflix anthology series Black Mirror was also partially inspired by the murders.
Oh. Okay.
Sorry that was so long.
My turn.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Very long. Okay. So I have the Colonial Parkway Murders.
Okay.
So it was where serial murders of at least 10 people in the U.S. state of Virginia between 1986 and 1989.
Okay, your last story was about Virginia, wasn't it?
Yes.
Huh.
If I remember.
Richmond.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think so. Killings were associated with the Colonial Parkway, a 22-mile-long thoroughfare that cuts through the Colonial National Historic Park and connects Jamestown, Williamsburg, and Yorktown.
Okay.
The first 2 victims were discovered dead inside a vehicle found on the parkway,
Oh no.
as was an abandoned vehicle belonging to another couple who were missing and presumed dead.
Okay.
Long stretches of the Colonial Parkway are devoid of any street lights and are extremely isolated, making it a popular lover's lane frequented by young adults.
Okay.
In each incident, a young couple sitting in a vehicle was targeted, with both partners being killed.
Okay.
3 pairs of victims were recovered, and another couple remains missing and presumed dead.
Oh.
Several additional homicides have also been tentatively linked to the 4 confirmed cases. The causes of death include strangulation, gunshot, and stabbing.
Oh, okay.
The killer or killers drove victims' vehicles away from the murder sites. The linking of the 4 crimes is circumstantial.
So this isn't solved.
Now it kind of is. Like,
okay.
They've kind of figured out who it was, but
Gotcha.
the dude's dead.
Yeah, got it.
In January 2024, authorities announced that at least 2 of the murders had been conclusively linked to an official suspect, Alan Wade Wilmer Sr., a local fisherman who had died in 2017.
Okay, of course.
And then,
of course.
And then Wilmer was conclusively linked to 2 more murders in 2026. He was also linked through DNA evidence to the previously unrelated murder of Teresa Lynn Spa Howell. Wilmer had been described as suspect number 1 in 2 of the murders, but was freed after passing an FBI polygraph test.
Okay.
Despite his status as a serial killer suspected of other crimes, Wilmer's DNA was not entered into the combined DNA index system, or CODIS. Victims' advocates have called for confirmed serial killers like Wilmer to have their DNA entered into CODIS.
Okay.
So I shall talk about the confirmed and suspected victims.
Okay.
So first ones, Rebecca Dowski and Kathy Thomas. The first known victims were Kathleen Marion, or Kathy Thomas, who was 27, a U.S. Naval Academy graduate in College of William and Mary Sr., Rebecca Ann, or Becky Dowski, who was 21, a business management major working as a stockbroker.
Okay.
So they were a couple, and they disappeared after leaving a computer lab on the William and Mary campus at around 6:30 p.m. on October 9th, 1986.
Okay.
Thomas had ventured onto the parkway in the past to be with romantic partners. So she was taking Dowski to the parkway.
Okay.
And so then October 12th, between 5:30 a.m., a jogger discovered a white 1980 Honda Civic at the bottom of an embankment at the Sheatham Annex, overlooked 7 miles east of Williamsburg. The Civic had veered off the road and into thick, dense shrubbery, only a foot from a 15-foot drop into the York River.
Damn.
A Virginia State Police parole man called to the scene, discovered their bodies inside the vehicle. Dowski's body was found in the back seat, while Thomas was found stuffed into the hatchback. An autopsy found rope burns on both women's necks and wrists, as well as signs of strangulation. Their throats had been slashed so deeply that they were nearly decapitated.
Oh, jeez.
Thomas apparently struggled with her attacker, as a clump of hair was later found between her fingers. Both women were fully clothed, and there was no evidence of sexual assault. Authorities ruled out robbery as a motive, since both women's purses were in the vehicle and no money or jewelry had been taken.
Okay.
The killer had covered the bodies in the vehicle with diesel fuel, but had not lit them on fire.
Okay. Weird.
Yeah.
Like, the whole situation's weird.
Yeah. So he was either, like, interrupted or...
Yeah.
Something, yeah. Over 100 latent and full fingerprints were found on the interior and exterior of the Civic, but they matched no one in police records. At that time, police believed that the murders happened elsewhere, as little blood was found in the car itself.
Okay.
In November 1986, just weeks after the murder, news outlets reported that FBI profilers were constructing a profile of the person or persons responsible for the murders. In 2024, Bill Thomas recalled that 4 days after his sister Kathy's death, the FBI suggested to him that the perpetrator may have been a member of law enforcement, because, like, how the stuff, because a few of them, like, how they find the cars, it's like the windows rolled down, and like their stuff's, like, license and stuff is out, like, to show.
Yeah, so it sounds like somebody falsely pulled them over, pretending to be police.
In 2026, authorities announced that DNA evidence had conclusively linked Alan Wilmer to the murders.
Okay.
Second couple, David Knobling and Robin Edwards. In 1987, salesman David Lee Knobling, who was 20, and 8th grade student Robin Margaret Edwards, who was 14, was murdered. Yeah, don't look at me like that. When I read that, I had to read that like 5 times. I said, what? They disappeared on September 19th after Knobling agreed to drive his younger cousin and Edwards on a date to a screening of the film Dragnet.
Oh, the cousin. That makes it better.
Well, Edwards is who it wasn't his cousin in the car.
Huh? Read that again?
So they disappeared on September 19th after Knobling agreed to drive his younger cousin and Edwards on a date.
And Edwards.
So his cousin wasn't in the car. It was just him and Edwards.
So it was his cousin and Edwards that were dating. He was just driving that other kid to the date. That's what it sounds like. Not that they were in a relationship. He was just bringing that child where they needed to go.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So it's not as bad as a relationship. Oh, God.
Knobling left his home around midnight, while Edwards left hers a half hour later. Knobling's truck, a black Ford Ranger, was discovered on September 21st by a patrolman at the Ragged Island Wildlife Refuge parking area with the wipers and radio on and the engine running. Okay. Both doors were open, and the driver's side window was partially rolled down, causing police to speculate that the perpetrator was either or had been posing as a uniformed officer, as I said earlier. Knobling's wallet was found inside the truck, which ruled robbery out as motive. Articles of clothing were also found in the vehicle. A group of teenagers partying on Ragged Island until 2 a.m. on September 19th, had reported no sighting of the pickup. On September 23rd, the bodies of Knobling and Edwards were found washed ashore with the tide about 100 feet apart on the bank of the James River. Both victims had been shot. Edwards in the back of the head, execution style, and Knobling twice, once in the head and once in the shoulder. Both were partially clothed. Edwards was found with her jeans unfastened and her bra around her neck. Investigators were unsure if a sexual assault had taken place, since despite Edwards being underage, it was presumed that she and Knobling had a sexual relationship. The state police later said she was assaulted. Authorities suspected a connection between the double murder of Knobling and Edwards to that of Dapsky and Thomas. Although the former deaths did not occur on the Colonial Parkway, both sets of victims were couples who had been killed at or around Lover's Lane, and the two locations were only about a 30-minute drive apart.
Okay.
On January 8th, 2024, authorities announced that DNA evidence had conclusively linked Alan Wilmer to the murders. Via DNA evidence, Wilmer was also linked to the otherwise unrelated 1989 murder of Teresa Lynn Howell.
Okay.
Third one, Brian Pettinger. So Brian Craig Pettinger, who was 25, a heavy equipment operator employed as maintenance man for a local apartment complex, was last seen at a Hampton Ballroom dance studio on December 4th, 1987 at 11:30 p.m.
Okay.
He was training to become a ballroom dance instructor.
Oh.
2 days after reporting him missing, his wife discovered his vehicle in the parking lot of the Newmarket North Mall. And then 2 months later, on February 3rd, 1988, fishermen found his body floating in a marshy area of the James River in Suffolk near the mouth of Chuckatuck Creek.
Okay.
His wrists and ankles were tied, and a rope was bound around his neck. The lead investigator in the case believed that Brian had likely been hogtied. The autopsy showed that he had suffered blunt force trauma to the back of his head. He was found to have been thrown alive into the river and drowned, unable to swim. The murder remains unsolved, so they couldn't really connect him to Alan.
Okay.
Pettinger worked as a security guard and a loss prevention officer for the same security service company as Edward's mother at the time of her murder. Okay. Suspect Wayne Elliott Mack, a fellow dance instructor, later acknowledged having left the studio with Pettinger. Mack died by suicide a few months later. So they're kind of thinking maybe
he had something
to do with it, since they couldn't really link him to Alan. Next one is Lori Ann Powell. So Lori Ann Powell Compton, who was 18, a graduate of Gloucester High School in Gloucester County.
One place.
Disappeared on March 8th, 1988 after an argument with her boyfriend Chris Cutler. According to Cutler, Powell exited his vehicle during the argument and was last seen at approximately 11:30 p.m. walking along State Route 614 toward the U.S. Route 17 interchange in White Marsh. Cutler was originally considered suspect in Powell's death, and then on April 2nd, 1988, her body was recovered from the James River near Ragged Island. She was found nude and has sustained multiple stab wounds to her back.
That's not good.
Powell had previously worked as a receptionist at the same security company that employed both Pettinger and the mother of Edwards. In November 2025,
November 2020,
authorities publicly confirmed that Alan Wilmer was responsible for her murder.
Okay.
Next is Cassandra Haley and Keith Call. So on April 10th, 1988, Christopher Newport College students Cassandra Lee Haley, who was 18, and Richard Keith Call, who was 20, was reported missing. Call, who was on a 2-week break from his regular girlfriend, asked out Haley, a classmate, to see a movie on Saturday night and then attend a party. What?
Whatever.
Cal picked up Haley at her family's residence in Grafton in his red 1982 Toyota Celica. The pair attended a party in the University Square area where they were seen socializing separately. They were last seen leaving the party sometime between 11:30 p.m. and 2:25 a.m. Cal's unoccupied vehicle was found at the York River Overlook in Yorktown on the day of their disappearance. The keys were on the driver's seat, and a watch and an eyeglass were left on the dashboard.
Okay.
Nearly all of Cal's clothing, including his underwear, was found in the back seat, as were some of Haley's clothes along with several empty beer cans.
Okay.
Haley's purse and Cal's wallet, however, were missing. Police dogs tracked the 2 students sent along the parkway past the site of the Dowski-Thomas vehicle recovery to the Indian Field Creek shoreline. Park authorities initially suggested the couple had gone swimming and drowned, a claim that was met with some skepticism given the 40-degree water temperature in early April and the steep 20-foot embankment. But the river and surrounding area was thoroughly searched. To this day, their bodies have never been found.
I mean, yeah, I can understand like the embankment part, but I know people who have jumped in a 40-degree fucking water.
Yeah.
Just for being stupid, but having to go down 20 feet on an embankment, no.
And so in the days after their disappearance, the FBI became aware of a local fisherman driving a blue 1966 Dog Fargo pickup who had approached at least one other couple on the parkway at around the same time.
Okay.
The suspect, later identified as Wilmer, was placed under surveillance and police observed him cleaning and spray painting his pickup.
Okay.
The FBI executed a search warrant of Wilmer's home, finding handcuffs and a gun.
Okay. I mean, not like...
You know. However, an FBI polygraph examiner cleared Wilmer, who was subsequently freed.
Okay.
And then in May 1988, the FBI offered a $10,000 reward in their disappearance. By June, the moniker Colonial Parkway Murders was being applied to the killings.
Okay.
So next we talk about Teresa Howell. So on July 1st, 1989, Teresa Lynn Howell, who was 29, was seen leaving the Zodiac Club, a popular Hampton night spot, at around 2:30 a.m. 7 hours later, her body was found by a construction worker in a nearby wooded area.
Okay.
Howell had been sexually assaulted and strangled. The murder was not connected to the Colonial Parkway killings until 2022, when DNA from the case was linked to the Nobbling Edwards killing. The DNA was later identified as belonging to Wilmer.
Okay.
So next, I have Anna Maria Phelps and Daniel Lawyer. On September 5th, 1989, Anna Marie Phelps, who was 18, and her boyfriend's brother, Daniel Lawyer, who was 21, vanished en route to Virginia Beach.
Okay.
Daniel's vehicle, a gold 1972 Chevrolet Nova, was later found abandoned at the westbound Interstate 64 rest stop in New Kent County. It is unclear whether Phelps and Daniel were killed at the rest stop or elsewhere. Both the driver and passenger side doors were unlocked and the keys were still in the ignition. Police found dirt and grass stains on the vehicle's underside, suggesting the car had recently been driven through the woods. Phelps' purse was found inside the car, so robbery was ruled out as a motive again. And then October 19th, the skeletonized bodies of Phelps and Daniel were discovered by hunters in a wooded area alongside Interstate 64 between Williamsburg and Richmond. They were covered in an electric blanket from Daniel's car.
Okay.
The bodies were badly decomposed, making it impossible to determine either the cause of death or whether had there been a sexual assault.
Okay.
They were found near a logging road about a mile away from the rest stop where Daniel's car was found. In 2010, a note was discovered in a box recovered years earlier from Phelps' apartment. The note, which was undated and purportedly written by Phelps, indicated that she was to meet someone in a blue van at a rest stop. The named individual and provided a phone number.
Okay.
But they didn't say who.
Okay.
So now a possible additional victims. So they're not 100% sure on these, but they're thinking it's these.
It just kind of aligns a little bit.
Yes.
Okay.
So first, Mike, Margaret, and Donna Hall. So on August 21st, 1984, the bodies of Michael Sturgis, or Mike, Margaret, who was 21, and Donna Lynn Hall, who was 18, were found in a wooded area approximately 300 yards southwest of the King's Crossing apartment complex in Henrico.
Okay.
The couple had been last seen on August 17th when they had told their respective families they planned to go on a camping trip together.
Okay.
3 days later, a retired dentist walking his dog discovered Mike's Jeep backed into a depression off the trail with the passenger doors open, keys in the ignition, and ashtray open. Okay. One red bandana was hanging from the rearview mirror and another loosely tied around the clutch. The canvas top of the Jeep had been rolled up and pinned back even though it had rained over the weekend. Inside the back were two suitcases and a paper bag filled with clothes. A trail of blood led to the bodies underneath a checkered red and blue blanket about 20 feet away. Both victims had been stabbed and throat slit.
God.
Yeah. The state coroner stated they had died at 2 a.m. on August 18th, only hours after they were last seen. Both had the sedative Demerol, which is also pethidine, also known as mepridine, and sold under the brand name, among others, is a fully synthetic opioid pain medication of the phenylpiperidine class, synthesized in 1938 as a potential anticholinergic agent in their systems.
Demerol is what they give you when you're having a baby.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So Hall's body was found without shoes or defensive wounds, but was clutching pine needles, leaving investigators to believe that she and Mike were actually killed where their bodies were found.
Okay.
Mike also had defensive wounds and a comparatively lower dosage of Demerol in his system. Some detectives believe that Hall and Mike were the first victims of the Colonial Parkway killers due to similarities in mode of operating. Next, we have Mary Harding. So in 2024, after Wilmer was officially identified as a suspect, it was revealed that his older brother, Keith, had been a suspect in the 1984 murder of Mary Kaiser Harding, who was 24, whose body was found floating in the Rappahannock River.
Okay.
Keith's wife, Brenda Pittman Wilmer, worked as at the same bank as Harding. Keith had been banned from the bank's premises after he has sexually harassed customers and employees, including Mary. What? Alan Wilmer's house and boat were searched by law enforcement at the time, but no evidence tying him to the crime was found. Alan also took a polygraph, but the results were inconclusive. And then another local fisherman, Emerson Stevens, was ultimately convicted and put in prison for Harding's murder. Stevens was later found to have been wrongfully convicted and was released from prison after serving 32 years.
Oh my God.
He received a full pardon from Virginia Governor Ralph Northam in 2021. Keith Wilmer died on April 30th, 2025 at age 73. So that was his brother.
April 30th?
Yes.
A lot of this shit is like happening in April. Like 2 of my last stories were April.
Mm-hmm.
That was last year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So down they have and then you have the Shenandoah National Park killings. So on June 1st, 1996, the bodies of Julianne Marie Williams, who was 24, and Laura or Lolly Salisbury Winans, who was 26, were found by park rangers at the Shenandoah National Park after Lolly's golden retriever was found wandering near the White Oak Canyon Trail.
Aww.
The two women who were in a relationship had gone on a camping trip in the park on May 19th. Williams and Winans were last seen alive in the park on May 24th. Their bodies were found at a remote campsite about a quarter mile from Skyline Drive. Winans' body was found inside a tent. Williams' body was found in a sleeping bag about 40 feet away down an embankment. Their hands were bound, their mouths were gagged, and their throats were slit.
Jesus.
Both were partially undressed, but neither were sexually assaulted. The FBI investigated whether the murders were related to the killings of Dowski and Thomas. In that case, the victims were similarly bound and stabbed and had not been molested. And both double murders occurred on National Park Service property, which were connected by Interstate 64. Detective Steve Spingola, who was asked to investigate the Colonial Parkway murders as a private investigator, believed that Dowski-Thomas killings were not related to the other Colonial Parkway murders and were instead connected to the Williams-Winans killings. So he was thinking Williams and Winans was technically the first one, and then he went to the Colonial part.
Gotcha.
And started killing people there.
Okay.
In 2001, the U.S. Department of Justice indicted Daryl David Rice for the Williams-Winans murders, but charges were dropped after DNA found at the scene matched neither Rice nor the victims.
Okay.
In 2024, 15 days after his exoneration, Rice was killed in a car accident.
Oh.
In June 2024, the FBI announced DNA evidence linked the killing to serial rapist Walter Leo Jackson. Jackson died in 2018 while incarcerated for other crimes.
Okay.
So they have theories.
I'm sure they do.
So, law enforcement, about like who did it before they figured out who it actually was.
Do they have theories about the why? Because it doesn't seem like there's any kind of motive.
Nope.
It's just like random. They're not being raped. They're not being robbed. They're just being killed. Like,
no motive.
I'm so confused.
And when they finally figured out who it was, they couldn't ask him because he was dead.
Well, yeah, but like there doesn't seem to be a motive other than the murder.
Yeah, and it's like the only connection is like they're couples. Pretty much. Yeah. You have like the one like weird. Singles, but like they're majority. Yeah. Yeah, they don't know.
Okay.
So many questions.
I don't like it.
So at the first crime scene, Thomas's wallet had been removed from her purse as if she was preparing to show her identification. And then just days after the first murder, the FBI privately suggested to family that the perpetrator might be a member of law enforcement or other authority figure.
Or someone impersonating, which that makes a lot of sense, especially like with the doors being open and the keys being in the thing and the engine being on. Because if a police officer pulls you over, please step out of the vehicle. You know, and that makes sense. Yeah.
And then, or they had a fisherman. So at the Dowski Thomas crime scene, a piece of nautical line had been found in Thomas's hair. Okay. The killer attempted to use diesel fuel to set fire to the victim's vehicle, suggesting the perpetrators purchase fuel at a gas station for use in a boat rather than purchasing it directly from a marina, a practice common to local fishermen.
But they didn't light anything on fire. Like,
nope. So that's why maybe he got interrupted or something.
Yeah.
The sharpness of the knife, which nearly decapitated Thomas, also suggested a fisherman.
Or a butcher.
Nobbling and Edwards were found on the banks of the James River. In the Haley Call case, police dogs traced the scent from the car to the nearby edge of the York River, suggesting the involvement of a boat.
Okay.
And then you have vehicle staging. So Thomas's vehicle was found with the driver's seat adjusted for someone taller than her, suggesting the killer may have driven it before it was pushed off the embankment. A search of the area failed to find any pools of blood. The murders had happened elsewhere, potentially not on the parkway.
Okay.
Nobbling's truck was found with the doors open, keys in the ignition, and the radio playing. Nobbling, an automotive enthusiast, never left his truck unlocked. He consistently parked by backing in, yet the truck was found parked by driving forward, and then Nobbling had wired his car's radio directly to the battery so that the ignition did not need to be set to accessories as it was when the truck was discovered. So that's why that's also knew how they knew it was like someone else did it, because they were like, that's when they like were interviewed, this isn't
how this is supposed to be.
Yes. Okay. And then when Call's vehicle was found on the parkway, families quickly disputed that the victims would have unintentionally parked there, because both Haley and Call's families reported their loved ones had a fear of the dark, isolated parkway at nighttime.
I mean, that's a healthy fear to have.
Yeah, they were like, they would park by light. They would park by light.
Yeah.
Call's keys were in the ignition, and his gold wristwatch was left in the seat, something family insisted he would never do.
Right. I mean, and obviously the MO is not robbery.
No.
Like, I'm so confused.
Lawyer's vehicle was found near a westbound interstate rest stop, but Lawyer and Phelps were known to be traveling eastward to Virginia Beach.
Okay.
And then a feathered roach clip, which Lawyer kept attached to the rearview mirror, had been transferred to the driver's side mirror.
A roach clip?
A feathered roach clip is what it says.
They were smoking the weed.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Smoking the weed.
Mm-hmm. Another theory, multiple offenders working together. They're working with theories here, okay? Larry McCann, head of the Virginia State Police's Behavioral Science Unit, argued that two individuals were working together in the murders. He felt the level of control demonstrated over victims suggested two perpetrators. Okay. Urban Wells of the FBI also suspected a pair of offenders, especially because they figured since you have two people, they're like, one needs to control one.
Right. And that was like my thing. Like, how are they able to do it? They couldn't figure out
nothing.
Yeah.
They had nothing.
I mean, and again, like, if they are impersonating an officer, it probably wouldn't be hard to dispatch one person and then immediately grab the second. Yeah. And they would probably dispatch the male first because the female was not likely to overpower them if they were, like you said, a larger male.
In a 2025 episode of the Mind Over Murder podcast, Kathy Thomas's brother Bill stated, quote, "I am fairly certain that Wilmer did not act alone." So, kind of thinking, because wouldn't I say his brother died? They're probably kind of thinking the brother
may have helped because he already had a murder case.
Yes.
Okay. I mean, that's very possible.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also very possible that he did it by himself. Because the Zodiac killer did it by himself. And he was very notorious for killing couples.
So then, Liberty Security Services. So, you know, the business I kept saying that pretty much everyone was related to.
Mm-hmm.
So, on April 19th, 1988, press reports alleged that local private investigator Ronald Little, then under arrest on immigration charges, was a suspect in the murder.
Okay.
Because Robin Edwards' mother, Bonnie, had been employed by Little's company, Liberty Security Services, while Brian Pettinger had worked for the firm as a security guard and loss prevention officer. And Lori Ann Powell Compton, who had gone missing on March 8th, 1988, was also an employee of the company.
Okay.
The FBI denied that Little was a suspect in the murders. Little was ultimately deported back to his native New Zealand in 1989 and has since died.
Okay.
In 2025, Bill Thomas opined, quote, "There just seems to be this reoccurring nexus around this small security company based in Gloucester, just a couple miles away from where Lori Ann Powell was last seen."
Okay. Oh, okay. I don't like it.
I'm not done. Suspect identified. The prime suspect in the murders, Alan Wade Williams Sr., worked as a fisherman on his own boat, the Denny Wade, primarily harvesting clams and oysters. He later started a tree cutting company. Wilmer was an avid hunter, a member of a local hunting club, and won local archery competitions. He was married once, February 22nd, 1975. He later divorced.
Okay.
He had 2 children, both adults at the time of his death in 2017. Wilmer was known to confront couples on the Colonial Parkway. In one instance, he had confronted a girl and a long-haired boyfriend, mistaking the pair for a same-sex couple.
And see, that was like one of my thoughts. Like maybe they were doing it because they were saying same-sex couples, but it was only 2 same-sex couples that were killed. And then the rest of them were like heterosexual couples or not even a couple.
Wilmer also placed himself near the site of the recovered vehicle in the Haley Call disappearance. Despite public protests, Wilmer's DNA was not entered into the CODIS.
Okay.
That's why they're like, now add serial killers to the fucking CODIS.
I mean, like, why wouldn't you? It doesn't make any sense. I don't like any of this.
Media coverage. So, because they had plenty of media coverage for this. In 2007, the case of Haley Call was featured in the investigation discovery program, Sensing Murder. In 2008, E! Entertainment Television presented a full-length documentary, THS Investigative Serial Killers on the Loose, which features a segment on the Colonial Parkway Murders. In September 2009, it was discovered by CBS News affiliate WTKR that nearly 80 highly graphic crime scene photographs of Colonial Parkway victims were used to instruct a class by a retired and since deceased former FBI photographer. In 2011, Arthur Michelle McNamara published a 2-part exploration of the Colonial Parkway murders in her true crime diary. Ugh. In October 2016, there was extensive coverage on the 30th anniversary of the Colonial Parkway murders, including an 8-part multimedia presentation by the Daily Press newspaper.
Okay.
On October 8th, 2016,
what?
The Richmond Times-Dispatch ran an in-depth article on the 30th anniversary of the Colonial Parkway murders case. After 30 years, relatives in Parkway murders hoped for a break in cases.
Okay.
On May 4th, 2018, the Colonial Parkway murders were covered in featured panel discussion at the annual Crime On True Crime Convention in Nashville.
Ooh, I want to go there.
Moderated by former FBI Special Agent Maureen O'Connell, the panel featured family members and advocates Joyce Call and Bill Thomas, along with Plain Pardoe, a co-author of a book on the case, A Special Kind of Evil, The Colonial Parkway Serial Killings. On July 23rd, 2018, Richmond station WTVR-TV reported there was additional DNA evidence available for testing in the Colonial Parkway murders. Investigation Discovery, the Norfolk Virginian, Pilot, Access Hollywood, The Daily Beast, List First, Daily Press, Dateline, NBC, and others have published later summaries of the case.
Okay.
On April 25th, 2019, the New York Times published a story on the use of DNA in the Golden State Killer case, the Colonial Parkway Murders, and other unspoiled homicides titled, "Sooner or Later, Your Cousin's DNA is Going to Solve a Murder."
Look, that genealogical DNA shit that solved my case for Angelica Ramirez, that shit is for fucking real, and I love it. I'm here for it. But I would love to go to a true crime convention.
On July 30th...
Goddamn.
I'm not dead.
I hear that.
On July 30th, 2019, the Washington Post ran a story on the search for answers in the Colonial Parkway Murders and other cases titled "Victims, Families, and America's Thirst for True Crime Stories." On September 17th, 2020, the publication Forensic Genomics published an article by family member Bill Thomas covering the Colonial Parkway Murders entitled "The Family Perspective." On January 15th, 2021, the Oxygen Network announced that a 4-part true crime series, Lover Lane Murders, would cover the Colonial Parkway Murders.
Okay.
The 4 episodes were to feature former FBI profiler Jim Clement, as well as investigators including former FBI agent Maureen O'Connell and former prosecutor Lonnie Coombs, together with crime scene reconstruction expert Dr. Laura Petler.
Okay.
The series made its debut on February 11th through 12th, 2021.
Okay.
On February 4th, 2021, in advance of their Lover's Lane murder television series, the Oxygen Network released a series of videos including why would law enforcement not release all records on a case like the Colonial Parkway murder, and was the Colonial Parkway killer pretending to be law enforcement. And then on April 2nd, 2025, Episode 1, Season 5 of Homicide Hunter, American Detective, hosted by Joe Kenda, covered the murders.
Okay.
That'd be it.
So I think, like, you know, they were saying, like, it was a fisherman or whatever, but I truly think that he may have been impersonating a police officer.
Mm-hmm.
I really do, because that makes so much more sense. Again, the killings don't make any fucking sense.
Yeah.
No robbery, no rape, no none of that. That doesn't make any sense to me, but it does make sense that he would be impersonating a police officer just based on how their vehicles were left.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like with their IDs out and everything, because like if some random ass fisherman like knocked on my door like, "Can I see your ID?" Like, who the fuck are you? No, get the fuck away from me. But if it's like, police, who's here? Is it police?
Sorry for the very long episode, guys.
Yeah, guys.
Lauren did not think her story was going to be that fucking long.
I didn't. You know, and again, I was just so fucking into the research, and by the time I was done, I had 37 pages, and I was like, fuck.
Yeah, she literally texted me and was like, yo, I'm at like 20 pages.
Yeah, I was like, and I'm not even halfway done.
And I'm like, bro.
Like, what do you mean? What do you mean?
I'm like, what do you mean 20 pages?
Yeah, I mean 20 pages.
I was like, you're not doing the big story. I'm doing the big story.
Yeah, and I really probably should have broken this one up, but I didn't want to have to do any extra research because I was already behind on the research, and that one took me like 2 or 3 days to do, you know, while I was like working or whatever, because I try not to spend time in my work office when I don't have to.
Yeah.
So I do my research like during my downtime, you know, during my hour-long lunch. If I wake up a little extra early, I get my breakfast, my drink or whatever, and then I'll come in here and kind of work on it. So it took me like 2 or 3 working days to finish it, and I was not about to try to find a different story. There wasn't no way. I was just like, you know,
said, fuck this shit. I'm giving y'all a long one.
Fuck it. You guys are going to, because like the next one or like our paranormal episode was like 30 minutes long.
Yeah.
So it kind of balances out, but it was a good story.
Kinda.
It was a good story. You know, it was a lot
Mine was confusing as fuck.
Yeah, yours was confusing. Mine was just sick.
Hers
But
was,
thank you guys for putting up with all of that.
Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. We do still appreciate the support. You can find us on Patreon, patreon.com/haunted and homicidal. We do have a free tier where it just kind of alerts you when our stories come out. There are paid tiers also if you guys want like some extra recordings, like, you know, we want to kind of start some stuff, but we are waiting to kind of see what the interests would be before we kind of like, I mean, we have like some ideas on the tiers of what it could be, you know, but I know the economy like really fucking sucks right now, and gas is so expensive and I hate it.
I had to get gas today. Fuck.
I had to get gas yesterday and I put $25 in and I'm almost on E, and I have been to Walmart.
The fuck?
I took London to work And then I went to Walmart and Five Below. But Five Below is literally down the street from my house.
Yeah.
I've been nowhere. Like, nowhere. It's just fucking ridiculous. Anyway, if you guys have any suggestions or, you know, like your own stories, I really, really, really want to do like a listener's tales. Email us at hauntedandhomicidal@gmail.com. And it could be, you know, true crime. It could be spooky dooky. You know, if you think you're telekinetic, you know, just like whatever. Just, you know, send us some stories. We would love to read them on air. That would be like super fun. I really want to start doing that. And then, of course, facebook.com/hauntedandhomicidal. That's where you can see the crazy pictures that we take while we're recording.
Yes. Like Lauren sticking her face in her shirt because she can't stand the smell of popcorn.
Look, I had to create a shirt mask because my shirt smells like cashmere glow or something from Bath & Body Works. It's like one of my favorite Bath & Body Works sprays. So it smells good, and popcorn, my house is going to smell like popcorn for 3 days, and I'm very upset about that. It makes me nauseous. I don't like it. But we'll have our photos there, you know, a little description of the stories and whatever. And, you know, if you guys see us on the Facebook, you can also relate your stories or whatever there, preferably in the email. You know, that way if you kind of want to be anonymous, you can be anonymous. People won't know who you are. But thank you guys for all the love and support.
And make sure you check out HauntFest.
We appreciate it. And like we're coming up on 100, like real soon.
Woo!
Like we're almost on 80 right now. So a couple more weeks and we'll be at 100. I'm excited.
What are we gonna do for that?
I don't know, but something big. It's gonna have to be. Maybe our 100th episode will have somebody on. Well, I don't know. We'll see. We'll do something big though. It'll be great. Again, look at HauntFest. Have a good time. Okay, love you. Bye.
Bye.